Lawyers. What was your facepalm moment in court? I was representing a plaintiff in a hit-and-run case. Plaintiff is testifying and is, despite me preparing them for several hours the previous day, an absolutely terrible witness for her own case. Like she couldn't even identify the street she was crossing when she was hit by the car. It was a major highway and we'd gone through the sequence of events countless times the day before the hearing. The "oh crap" moment came during cross-examination. Defense counsel pulls out a picture of my client dressed up and ready to hit the club, which was posted to Facebook the day after the alleged incident. I, thinking quickly, object because the timestamp refers to when it was posted, not when it was taken. Defense counsel shows the picture to my client and asks her when the picture was taken. Sure enough, they say it was taken the day after the accident when she was supposedly in unbearable pain. Oh crap. Just as well, they didn't deserve to get anything. When I was in college, I was a bailiff. Guy is on trial for murder. First witness testified that she saw the defendant shoot the victim. Second witness states the same. Police officer testimony is that he arrived at the scene and defendant was there holding the piece. Coroner testimony is that the first bullet hit the victim in the arm, the second one hit the victim in the torso, and the third one hit the victim in the heart, which was the fatal shot. The defendant yells out, "See, that proves I didn't do it. I only shot the motherfudger twice." Sat in on a personal injury case where the plaintiff broke their leg in an accident and had a doctor on the stand as an expert. The woman's lawyer begins questioning the doctor about their experience with leg injuries. He was a well-known orthopedic surgeon in the area. She asks if he's ever treated a tibular fracture. The leg bones are tibia and fibula, by the way, to which the doctor only answers, "No, I've never treated a tibula." Then she starts grilling him with questions about the tibula. About 6 to 7 questions afterwards, she asks, "How did you get a medical license and have been able to practice medicine this long if you've never treated a tibular fracture?" And begins a small rant about going after his credentials and those that gave it to him, to which he simply responds, "There is no bone named the tibula." The lawyer became beetroot red and everyone in the court tried their best to keep from laughing, including the judge. If you're grilling a well-known expert in a particular field and you're getting quizzical looks from them, it can sometimes be worth wondering why you, a person who knows nothing about the subject matter, seem to be winning the discussion. It could be a trap, or maybe, like this lawyer, you're asking questions about made-up bones. Check yourself before you legally wreck yourself. I was a baby lawyer in my first year representing the 19-year-old child of some rich people in San Mateo County, California. My client had gone on a bit of a shoplifting spree and we were cleaning all her cases up with a global plea, meaning we handled them all at once. Being new, I filled out the plea form wrong, swapping the counts she was charged with for the counts she was pleading to. It's an easy mistake to make. Every court has their own unique form and I was unfamiliar with San Mateo's. The judge calls my line, starts reading off the plea form, notices the mistake and then starts screaming at the top of his lungs, "Counsel, what is this? What is this? Is this your first day on the job? This is a court of law and we do not accept mistakes. Fill this plea form out correctly or I'll have you taken into custody for contempt." I did not expect a reaction like that. My client, who'd clearly just taken a huge rip of illegal substances at 8 a.m. and who was wearing an all-pink velvet tracksuit, was looking at me like I was the biggest idiot in the world. I corrected the plea form. The judge made me wait until the very end of the calendar to take my plea. Afterward, he called me up to the bench. In private, he told me, "I'm sorry to ream you like that. Everyone messes the plea form up, so I always pick the youngest lawyer to yell at. The older guys will grumble and complain, but if you noticed, they all fixed their forms, and we didn't have any more problems. It keeps the calendar running smooth. Where did you go to law school?" After that, he invited me into his office for coffee and gave me some really good life and work advice. Turns out he likes talking to new lawyers. In short, a judge loses his crap in court over a simple mistake. Turns out it was all a show for the other lawyers, and I have one of the worst and best court experiences of my early career. Represented a woman charged with multiple very serious felonies in the state of Virginia. She insisted that in the months before the offense, she had been seriously dating one of the detectives who ultimately wound up investigating and testifying in her case. For a variety of reasons, I trusted this client and believed her, even though the detective never disclosed the relationship in his report. So during his testimony, I ask, "Detective Smith, You had a romantic relationship with Miss Defendant, correct? He goes, "What? No," and is visibly offended. The judge looks at me like I've lost my mind. The Commonwealth attorney audibly says, "What?" I'm freaking out because a large part of my cross and argument was focused on the bias formed by the prior relationship, and now I've got nothing and I've lost all credibility. I try again. "Detective Smith, have you had relations with Miss Defendant?" As the Commonwealth rises to object and the judge starts to scold me, the detective goes, "Oh yeah, we did it. It just wasn't very, romantic." The judge acquitted my client of the relatively minor charge that the detective in my story was involved with, but convicted of the other, much more serious charges that detective had nothing to do with. There was a confession and video on the serious charges, so it was kind of a no-brainer. Sorry, I'm being intentionally vague, but there are no confidentiality concerns, since this all happened in open court. But it's just distasteful to give out too much information about a client. The detective was not disqualified, his testimony was not thrown out. Impeachment, no matter how good, doesn't result in you getting to throw out a witness's testimony entirely. By the way, it wasn't really the doing of the deed that was the issue, it was that he didn't disclose it to anyone, and his repeated insistence under questioning that he didn't disclose it because it was irrelevant. Like Watergate, it's not the crime, it's the cover-up that gets you. But I don't get to demand the judge throw out the testimony or that charge just because the cop failed to disclose a prior relationship with the defendant. I just get to point it out, argue it in closing, and then hope the jury also sees the relevance. In the UK, and bear with me on this one, I was in court listening to the most boring old defense lawyer you've ever seen. He was questioning the arresting officer in the case. It was substances or something like that. Anyway, he's droning on about every little detail, and the magistrate was constantly telling him to hurry along. The arresting officer was getting noticeably annoyed, and the room became pretty empty pretty quickly. Everyone was very bored and annoyed. He was droning about details that I'm not sure anyone was really listening to or cared about. Anyway, he went over arrest times and the likes with the officer, time he admitted the suspect and released him. He had bored the officer to the point where the guy was barely paying attention. So he was admitted in at 21:45 on the night in question. Yep. And released the night after. Yep. And what time was that exactly? Just after 10 p.m.? Yep, that's about right. What time after 10 p.m.? I don't know, 10:15 maybe. So my client was detained for more than 24 hours. Correct? What? The penny dropped. The officer had let his guard down and had revealed that he had kept the defendant for more than 24 hours, which is the max time for detention in the UK. The defense rested, and the magistrate threw out the case immediately. Well played, sir. Well played. There you go, boring people of the internet. If you feel depressed that your friends fall asleep in the middle of your stories, and that the light seems to leave their eyes when you open your mouth, just get a job as a lawyer. You can be a superstar when you drone the opposing party into submission. Got called for jury duty. I was at the jury selection phase and they asked if anyone here thinks they should not, blah blah. Defendant was in the room. I raised my hand. The defending lawyer looked at me like, "Oh, this ought to be good," and asked me to explain. I suggested I tell them in private. He insisted I tell the courtroom. I said, "Okay, I probably shouldn't be on this jury because I was on a previous jury for this man, which returned a guilty verdict." The lawyer's face went, "Oh crap." Commotion and a wait while they looked up records. Yep, verified. The whole jury was now tainted. Everyone goes home and they start over. I was interning for a judge. We were in the middle of voir dire for what was frankly not that exciting of a criminal case. Half-day trial expected, not salacious details or violence or anything. 75 potential jurors in the room, and when my judge didn't let a guy out of jury duty because he'd have to pick up his kids, that guy proceeded to say in front of everyone that if he's made to show up next week, he'd make it the shortest trial ever and find him guilty right out the gate. My judge was an incredibly even-keeled guy, nothing shook him or got a rise out of him, and he was an expert at figuring out what he wanted to say in the most neutral fashion possible before he said it. Conversations with him took forever because there was a pause before every sentence. But then, this guy had just poisoned an entire jury pool of 75 people. We had to individually question each person to see if that little outburst was going to affect their impartiality. 75 in-camera interviews later, The judge pulls the guy back in front of everyone and begins to scream at him about disrespecting him, the courts, and every other juror's time. Me, the attorneys, and the court reporter go white-faced because we didn't know this was coming. The guy didn't have to sit for jury duty, but I still don't know if he got to pick his kids up since he spent a couple of days in jail for contempt. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was involved in a pretty messy custody case. The other party was playing a lot of stupid games and kept requesting continuances. I requested a substance test, which the judge ordered. However, the defendant didn't submit it. To clarify, he did show up, he just stood in front of the loo for literally 2 hours and claimed he couldn't go number 1. I was representing the plaintiff, so the burden was on me. I called multiple witnesses that testified to the defendant's substance use. So the opposing counsel decides to call their client for direct examination and asks, "You don't use smack, right?" That is, for the non-lawyers, a very stupid question for many reasons, especially considering his client didn't show up for his substance test. However, I fully expected the defendants to just lie and say he was clean. After the question was asked, there was a really long pause and the defendant said, Yeah, I do." My head almost exploded. I didn't ask any questions on cross-examination because I didn't want to muddy the waters. I won, and the child is doing great. Mine actually happened while I was sitting in the jury pool during voir dire. The case was a double homicide and the jury pool filled the entire courtroom. If you're not familiar with voir dire, it's when the lawyers ask the potential jurors questions to determine who they want to sit on the jury and who they want to exclude. It's a long and boring process for almost everyone involved, but 9 times out of 10 it's the most important stage in a case. So the lawyers are asking us questions, and if that question applied to you, you raise your hand and they hand you a microphone to answer the question. The question asked was, do you or anyone you know have prior knowledge of this case? So this older gentleman raised his hand, is handed the mic and proceeds to say, "Yeah, I work at the police station as a janitor and I heard 2 detectives talking about him," points to the defendant, "and they were saying he was about as guilty as sin." We all stared open-mouthed at the guy and I start chuckling because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Naturally, the defense attorney asked to approach the bench, followed quickly by the state prosecutor. After some quick and energetic whispering, the judge addressed the man. "Do you realize what you just did? You potentially poisoned the entire jury pool. I'll be calling your boss and you'll be hearing about this. You can count on that. You're dismissed, sir, but this isn't over." The man was escorted out and then the judge addressed the remaining jury pool, which was still in the mostly packed room. Now, I want you all to disregard what that man just said. I'm sure if any of you were ever accused of a crime like this, you would want a fair trial and not to be condemned based on the words of one old man. I've been in court many times since, but never have I seen that level of downright jaw-dropping absurdity again. My boss had to defend a small-time delinquent as a duty solicitor. Before going to court, he asked her what he should do. She explained to him if he was cooperative and truthful, his sentence would be milder. After hearing the case, the judge asked him if he wanted to add something. He got up and explained to the judge, "My counsel told me to be truthful, so I wanted to tell you that not only did I do the robbery I'm being heard for, but also several others in the region." He continued to admit to several robberies that had been unsolved yet, and everyone, even the state attorney, were facepalming. Oh boy, when you follow your instructions on the class presentation to the absolute letter, look up and realize that your teacher, friends, and even your bullies are just facepalming and embarrassed for you. This has the same energy, but on a much grander scale with much more serious consequences. I almost feel bad for this hardened criminal. Literally the first thing I ever did, I was just a law student intern. The guy had a legit defense on a substance possession case, substances found in a jacket, guy wasn't wearing the jacket, they were going to have a very difficult time proving the jacket belonged to my guy. Had a long meeting with the client, explained everything. The client was excited. Day of the preliminary hearing, the guy shows up and sits down directly in front of the officer who arrested him while wearing the jacket in question. The exact same jacket we were going to say they couldn't prove belonged to him. Not in court, but at tribunal, and also I was plaintiff, suing for wrongful termination. My rep said, "So you terminated him because he was ill?" The employer said, yes, sir. And he was ill because he's disabled. Yes, sir. So you fired someone for being disabled. Yes, sir. I was in court for a directions hearing. The judge was already in a bad mood and asked why we were here for such a seemingly pointless litigation. Without giving details, he was right. The barrister starts to make our case, and I'm making notes about areas we need to further explore when I hear, "Excuse me, why were you so rude to me?" The client, who'd been told not to come, had come to court that day and was evidently incensed by the judge questioning the merit of their case. They berated the judge for about 3 minutes, with me and my co-counsel first stunned and then trying to shut them up before the judge adjourned the hearing. The case did not go very well, to my client's surprise and fury. Not me, but my former law partner. She was in court representing a client. I think in a hearing for a restraining order against her soon-to-be ex-husband. Our client was telling the judge that when they met to exchange the children for visitation, the ex had kicked her. He immediately, angrily shouted, "She can't prove it. I didn't leave a mark." Thanks, buddy. Probably the funniest one I ever came across happened to a colleague. We were prosecutors then. 18-year-old defendant applying for bail. He needed a residential address and got his dad to show up at court to confirm that the family home was available to him. The defense lawyer gets old dad to confirm that son can stay at the family home. Dad says yes. My fellow prosecutor gets up and asks dad, "Do you really want him home?" Dad goes off the deep end. "Jesus, the grief he's bought me and his mother. At all hours, throwing smack, hiding stolen property in the garage, all-night parties. I'm on antidepressants and the wife's had a nervous breakdown." Dad goes off on one for 5 solid minutes. As the defendant gets taken back to the cells, he calls out, "Thanks, Dad, I owe you one." In pre-mediation meeting, once for an uninsured motorist, an insured had alleged that she couldn't walk without the aid of a cane and had a pronounced limp after an accident due to a lower back injury and a shooting pain in her right leg. The doctor's notes didn't support anything but a subjective injury after a few weeks, but she was still treating it 2 years later and going to new physicians. We had followed her covertly to see if she was really using the cane and had a limp. We got footage of her carrying like 4 grocery bags in each arm to her car in a Walmart parking lot, walking perfectly fine. When she got to her car, she even opened the trunk of her SUV without putting any bags down and lifted the gate with her knee part way. Her elderly mother was with her using a particularly decorative purple cane with a flower pattern on it. They followed her to a doctor appointment an hour later and she's on video using her mother's cane and walking with a limp that would give Forrest Gump a run for his money. Never did follow up on how that played in the mediation, but I can only imagine it gave some attorney a facepalm moment for the ages. 2 moments in a DUI trial. The first was a passenger testifying for driver's sobriety when the DA asks her, "You keep saying he was sober, but are you even TIPS certified?" Which is a course for bartenders so they can recognize drunk patrons. She was certified. 2. The head of the county's blood lab accidentally admitted he'd cranked the sensitivity of his machines way up because he was, quote, experimenting. I didn't entirely get while I was putting the script together that these were in the same case. My goodness. It's good to know that the ruthless agents of the state that we can end up in front of make whoopsies like this when they have brain toots or don't get their cup of coffee before the trial. Makes me feel better about messing up major parts of my life like this on a daily basis. I was a defendant. As a teenager, I got busted with a couple of buddies throwing eggs at cars. We were actually only in the courtroom for our sentencing, and there was no trial. The judge called each of us up individually to ask us if we had anything to say. One of my friends tells the judge that he's a good kid who doesn't normally do things like this. That's a lie, we used to do it all the time. And that, "I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time." I wish there was a video of my other friend and I sitting on the benches watching this happen. We simultaneously dropped our heads into our hands because we couldn't believe that idiot just said that. The judge was not pleased and she took the opportunity to remind him that going to a store, buying eggs, going to another location across town, and then throwing those eggs at cars was not just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Late to the party here, but as a law student we were allowed to make court appearances under the supervision of an assistant district attorney. I was doing arraignments and my ADA said, "Don't talk to the judge unless he asks you specific questions." So the judge and the defense attorney were going back and forth about when the next court date would be. The judge wanted a specific date, let's say 4/20. The defense attorney was adamant that she couldn't do that date. In my file, I had a calendar with a big X over 420 saying, "Do not schedule." The judge and defense attorney go back and forth for several minutes. The judge wanted 420 and the defense attorney kept saying no. I was keeping my mouth shut because the judge hadn't asked me directly. Finally, the defense attorney relents and agrees to 420. The judge turns to me and says, "Do the people agree with the 20th of April?" At which point I say, "Sorry, Your Honor, but we cannot schedule for that day." The judge looked at me for a second and then just ripped into me. "Mr. Jones, you just heard me and the defense go back and forth for several minutes about a date you knew the people couldn't do. Do you like wasting the court's time?" It went on like that for a few minutes, him just berating me in front of about 200 people in court in Brooklyn. Finally, after me apologizing profusely and him giving me a withering glare, we moved on and went to the next case. At the next break, the judge approached and said, "Mr. Jones, please approach the bench." I thought I was really in for it. I walked up to the bench, the judge came down to talk to me and said with a big smile, "Don't worry about it, I was just giving you a hard time. Welcome to the Brooklyn Criminal Court." I was a character witness for my childhood dog in a civil trial between our neighbors and my parents. Opposing counsel was questioning me. I wasn't even out of elementary school at the time, and he asked if our dog was aggressive. She was a Rottweiler and very loving and incredibly protective of me and my siblings. His final question to me is one that I'll never forget. He asked, "Did your father tell you what to say before you came into court today?" I responded, "Yes." Then he asked, "What did he tell you to say?" I said, "The truth." Now, I was too young to remember the courtroom reaction, but according to my father, the judge audibly guffawed and the opposing counsel lost all the wind out of his sails. What's the craziest reason you've had to fire an employee? Employee 1 wearing earplugs on a string. Employee 2 comes up behind Employee 1 and decides to yank on the string, which pulls earplugs out of ears very fast. This causes a vacuum in the ear canal and effectively pops your eardrums outward. It hurts real bad. Employee 1 got mad, yelled, and possibly cussed Employee 2. Employee 2 decides he doesn't like Employee 1's attitude about the situation. Employee 2, who's an amateur boxer, punches 1 to lay him out on the floor. Employee 2 is a marvelous piece of work. All that amateur boxing must have knocked the sense right out of his head. Before this incident, Employee 2 graced me with a conversation. Why he felt the need to say these things to me, I don't know. Maybe this lends legitimacy to the theory that he had the sense knocked out of his head. I think it just gives insight into a crappy human. Employee 2 was married and had a newborn or toddler. Apparently, his underage teen niece would babysit with another friend keeping company. Employee 2 indicated he thought both teens were hot and had a number of ideas about them that were extremely inappropriate. He slashed my tire after I told him to go to work instead of sitting in the break room. He obviously didn't want to go back to work, so I think you did him a favor. I gave my secretary a document that I wanted incorporated into a letter I had written, and she hucked the document like a frisbee into her trash can. It was literally my only copy, so I had to walk over and fish it out. That was her last day. What the frick? Man, you must have more stories. How did she interview? She was already there when I started. She worked for someone else but had problems with that person, so they tried putting her with me. Who would have thought she had problems with another person? Had an employee, a nurse, who was drinking on the job, snuck vodka in a plastic water bottle. We became suspicious when she began behaving erratically. Then we noticed that she was super possessive of her bottle and never let it leave her sight or let anyone else near it. She messed up and left it at her desk when she went to the bathroom. So we sniffed it and she was busted. Hot mess that woman was. Almost identical to my story at my job. She had an irreplaceable water bottle. One day in a downpour, she had to go out to her car to get her magic water bottle. Came back loaded and soaking wet. She never made it back to her desk. And here I am wondering if with that last sentence they mean that she was fired for being obviously loaded, or whether she didn't make it back to her desk because she hit on a coworker, tripped and fell and then spewed up in her handbag. I was part of a group of IT contractors together for a large international project. The client would get us apartments to live in at each implementation site for 6 to 12 months. A member of my team got into a disagreement with the CTO when he came to visit our site, which resulted in her screaming personal attacks at him in the hallway when he tried to step outside to de-escalate the argument. She was fired on the spot, but then proceeded to go back to the apartment provided by the company and completely wreck it. The site was in the middle of the desert, and she had opened all of the windows and doors, turned the AC on max, stopped all of the drains and turned the water on, threw red nail polish all over the bathroom. It was the most extreme breakdown in a professional environment I've ever seen. I never learned of any follow-up, i.e. legal action, I think because the CTO was embarrassed he had to ask us to check her apartment since he'd already left town. While I didn't fire her, I was offered the chance to work with her again 12 years later via anonymous reference, and obviously rejected her as a candidate. Think twice about burning that bridge, or at least how you do it. I once had an employee Snapchatting as he drove an ambulance with a crew member and patient in the back through an intersection during a red light. Rubbing a pregnant co-worker's belly 3 times after being asked to stop and then asking her if her husband was good at doing the deed. I fired him and he asked if we could still be friends. No. Then he tried to file for unemployment after only working there for 3 weeks, part-time. We had a similar guy like that in our company. He was only with us for about 2 months before it happened. We were having our annual Christmas dinner and he was putting his arms around one of the managers all night and grabbing her hand when she got up to leave for the bathroom or whatever and asking her where she was going. He wasn't even drunk and he was asked about 5 times to stop it before she actually shouted at him in the middle of the restaurant. Didn't see him around after that night. One of our delivery drivers was supposed to be training a new employee, basically driving around and introducing them to routes and customers and that kind of thing. Well, he told the new driver to just drop him off at the park down the street, and when my boss drives the 15 seconds to the park, he was doing smack with local homeless people. Literally doing smack with hobos at the park. So of course the dude got fired. Then maybe a month later, we get a call from a customer saying that he was walking in the middle of a busy intersection with our company's shirt on. Guy had a crush on a female co-worker. He passed her a note at work one day with a gob of hand lotion inside it and the words, "I got really excited thinking about you earlier." The girl freaked out and went to management. The guy got escorted out. Had an employee pull a piece on me. This was after he got fired for threatening others at a Tier 1 help desk. Made everyone uncomfortable the entire time he was there. He's still in jail, it's been about 8 years now. I had an employee who got drunk on her lunch break, flipped her car, went to jail, mugshot with her company logo on her shirt. Perfect. Everyone is asking, our lunch break is 1 hour. Many employees leave to go out and eat. Potentially there were other substances involved. I work in pizza delivery and we had a guy back in the day, fellow manager, who tried to shut down the store 5 hours before the time that corporate set for us to close. He clocked every person out and sent them home and then just refused to take the phone calls or anything like that. He was fired immediately after our boss found out and he even tried to come into work the next day like everything was fine. We used to do crap like that at my store once or twice a year. We always said the oven broke down or the power went out. No one bothered to check and nobody ever got in trouble. We legitimately ran out of food multiple times and had to close because of it. I'd usually stay there and answer the phones because I think irate customers are the best thing ever. Picking up and telling them that everyone else is gone, I'm just there cleaning, and that we were completely out of everything on the menu, would usually get some sort of snarky, "Well, why did you pick up the phone?" kind of comment where I could just say, "To get it to stop ringing," and just wait for them to start cussing so I could hang up on them. Good God, I miss those days. As a former McDonald's employee, I can't imagine how on earth any of us would keep our jobs if we pulled some crap like this. I can't imagine any chain wouldn't be well regulated enough to stop this from happening under anything but the most extreme circumstances. I wasn't the manager, but watched the whole thing happen. A few years ago, I worked at a restaurant, and we had kind of an annoying new hire. One of those, "I'm too good for this" types. It was this kid's first job and first day out of training. One of his tables was a family with 2 small children who were being obnoxious, but hey, it's a family restaurant, that's expected. While walking away from the table, he muttered something along the lines of, "Shut up, you fricking kids." Except he didn't actually mutter, he spoke at normal volume. The mother overheard and was not pleased. He was sent home and invited not to return. "I'm gonna start inviting people to not come back to things. Congratulations, you've been invited to frick off." One of our warehouse workers was a young man about 25 years old. He was suspected of having a substance problem, mostly because of absenteeism and that he just seemed off at times. One day, he called our office manager from the back parking lot of our building and said that he had an upset stomach and had pooped his pants. She told him she would try to find a change of clothes to bring out to him, but before she could, he ran into the building and into the bathroom off the lobby, trailing his accident smeared on his shoes onto the floor. He then took off the crap-filled pants and left them in the bathroom and ran back outside to his car. At that point, everyone else in the small office was running outside to escape the horrible smell. Our office manager found a pair of pants in someone's locker and took them to where the guy was parked, but turned around when she saw him standing beside his car with no pants or underwear on. While everyone else was figuring out how to deal with the doo-doo in the office, the guy got in his car and left. He showed back up 3 days later as if nothing had happened. He was told to head back home. I could never figure out why he ran inside. If you crapped your pants, wouldn't you just get in your car and drive home? I once crapped in my pants on my way to work, had some chicken that didn't agree with me. This was the start of a very bad case of food poisoning. I just turned around and went home, called work and told them I had food poisoning. Paid my sister to use our carpet cleaner to clean my car seat. I don't trust my toots anymore. I'm not the manager involved, but I think this fits the bill. A coworker of mine who was a little bit too into his car got snapped doing twice the speed limit. Instead of pulling over for the patrol car behind him, he decided to run for it. He led a police chase to the office and shook them off by hiding in the underground parking. The GM watched it happen from his office. He took the lift down, found the coworker's car, and told him not to bother getting out. But did it clear his wanted level? Yeah, but the stupid motherfricker ran over a cop leaving the garage. He's gonna need to hit the paint shop. Eggplant pic on the office cloud storage. How did you go about identifying the culprit to fire him? Luckily, it wasn't my job to do, but if I recall correctly, they identified him from the computer used to log in. In the details on the file itself, the type of phone used to take the photo, and the directory the file was in. There's a chapter from Let's Pretend This Never Happened about the author having to learn how to ask, "Is this your eggplant?" with a straight face while working HR for a faith-based organization that apparently had a problem with folks using their company emails to send each other eggplant pics. It's fantastic. For extra fun, there's a line from that chapter as follows. "Are these your Johnsons?" I highly recommend getting the audiobook as read by the author, Jenny Lawson. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Years back, a coworker got into some trouble for something and got called into the owner's office. A few minutes later, you hear a huge thump. The idiot broke his hand on the boss's desk during their disagreement. He got a police escort off the property. Worked as a bartender at a restaurant. I was cashing out a waitress who decided to enter the bar to make herself a smoothie. After fumbling around, she dropped a wine glass from the hanger and it smashed all over the counter. I told her she's going to need to clean it up before I can finish cashing her out. She then begged me that she needs her tips right now as her friend who she owes money to is waiting outside and that she was going to deliver the money, come back and clean it up. She never came back and I had to replace all the ice and all the fruit garnishes on a busy weekend night because of broken bits of glass that landed all over it. Of course, the manager comes over to ask why the drink tickets are 10 minutes long and I told him what happened. They immediately went into the schedule and gave all her future shifts to other people. The waitress called the restaurant not even 5 minutes later to ask why her shifts had been forcibly given away, and the manager replied, "'Cause you're fired," and hung up. Had an employee pass out in his truck in a customer's driveway. Customers called me to report said employee had a glass pipe on his chest. Luckily, guy decides to call me instead of the sheriff. The employee was picked up and brought back to the shop. When asked what was going on, he stated, "I was on a break, it wasn't green herb, it was just spice." "Sorry, bud, I don't think this is going to work out." "Spice? Do you spice? Are you looking for the Suncut Bazaar?" I see you critters answering these stories and I love it. Let me know below if you understood the reference. Fired a guy in his first week for browsing and downloading adult flicks at work on his lunch break. On a computer in a large room that other people worked in, at a government organization. So caught him red-handed, warned him not to do that, already thinking this guy will be fired at the end of the day, but have to go through the channels, was a weekend shift, and then 2 hours later he does it again at the same place. At that point I had the VP's approval to just fire him, and we'll deal with the paperwork on Monday. Let him go, he's shocked but doesn't say much. Being the only manager on site, I take screenshots of the sites he's visited, forward it off to HR and the VP to document it all. A few days later, the guy's father calls the VP to complain about his son being fired. Guy was in his mid-20s. Apparently, the fired employee never thought him being fired on the day he was busted for browsing adult flicks on a government computer in a government office was the reason to be fired, and he never told his irate father about this. So the VP deals with this very diplomatically, saying employee was viewing inappropriate content at work, was warned, continued bad behavior. Father doesn't accept the explanation, so the VP starts reading off the list of sites that were visited. All of them were hardcore sites geared toward large African-American women. Fired employee was Caucasian. The real kicker to this was that the VP believed that the fired employee was listening in on his father's conversation via another phone. Just as the sites were being read off, there was a very audible click of that phone being hung up. My husband is a manager, and his employee somehow had another employee's ID and then stole that person's check and cashed it. Caught it all on camera. She still denied it. In the legal field, that's called the shaggy defense. But we saw you sign the paper. It wasn't me. We even caught you on camera. It wasn't me. I hope this is a real thing between legal personnel. I had to send a guy to a remote gas and petroleum refinery site for an inspection. Previously, he had been reliable on most occasions. However, on this occasion, he never showed up for the pre-substance or alcohol test the day before he had to fly out and gave me a long-winded excuse, basically blaming his car troubles. At this point, I would have gone myself to the site, however, I was just back from a bone graft to my collarbone, so I wasn't going anywhere. The director made the final decision to send him anyway against my recommendations. We flew him to the site to do his on-site induction where he would do the D&A test anyway. Partway through his induction, he got up and left. I called him that night but never got an answer, so I checked his accommodation and the hotel claimed he had checked in within the last half hour. I was just glad nothing major had happened. Next morning I speak to the client and the client informs me that the staff member apologized for leaving abruptly and had to rush off and deal with some personal issues. I don't press it any longer. 2 hours goes by and I get a call from the client stating that they've kicked him off site because they've found him asleep on site, and when they woke him up, he became extremely aggressive. The client is furious about this and says we're a cowboy of an operation for sending someone like this and to fly someone up the next day to finish the job. That night, we have a conference call with the client, stating that we were no longer going to be working for them due to this issue, costing our company roughly $1 million for the loss of the contract. We bring him the day after he flies back to ask about his actions. I'm supposed to head this up and get his side of the story, except before we even really get into discussing things, my director asks, "If we were to substance test you today, will you fail?" He answers, "Yes." And he's told he's being terminated instantly. He starts yelling at the top of his lungs and blaming his actions on everyone else. I told him he needs to leave straight away or police will get called. He does. He leaves then for the next month, and our admin receives emails about how I'm terrible at my job and I should be fired for not listening to his problems, which he had never spoken to me about. So yeah, that was the day I fired my brother and found out he was addicted to crystal. There was a lot going on post his termination, and me and my dad combined to pay for rehab costs. He never stayed both times he was sent. Then there was physical threats of attack to my mum and my family for not giving him money. That's where I cut contact. Every update since has been from my dad. He hasn't seen my mum. He's working during the day and studying at night. I hope this time he can do well. As for the services that our employer offered, previously he had been given aid for counseling due to depression. Out of those 12 sessions, he had gone to 3. The situation gave me some pretty severe anxiety and depression. You can blame the plot twist way that I've written this due to the fact that I've just watched season 1 and 2 of Black Mirror over the last few nights. In auto sales, one of our salesmen always seems to be up to something. Between lying to all our customers, substance use, and constant fighting at home, he was impossible to manage. Unfortunately, he was the type that gave the rest of us a bad name. Eventually, he got into it with our GSM about several issues, and his go-to was to start making fun of our GSM's handicapped son. I had so much respect for our GSM, he took him in an office, told him he was terminated, and walked out, even though I know inside he was boiling with rage. I'm glad that guy's gone. And good riddance. Good gosh, did he want to be fired or something? It makes my mind spin that even if you harbor crappy opinions, you can somehow imagine that saying stuff like this won't get you fired. Not a manager, but I had to share my story. Worked at Jumbo Juice. Co-worker put bare hands into his pants and scratched his crotch at the register while helping a guest. When the guest commented, he put his fingers in the guest's face and said, "Smell it." "Smell that? That's the Jumbo." Wow. I had an officer under me. He was reported in a tree. I went to investigate the last place he was seen. He was still there, attempting to pepper spray birds. I wish I could have made that up. He was fired immediately. What's hilarious is that pepper spray has no effect on birds. They can't taste it and it doesn't irritate their eyes. I actually didn't know that. Good gracious, put him below subpar. Maybe that's why he was trying to pepper spray birds. Maybe he had heard it somewhere and wanted to see if it was true. I own a tree removal service. Hired a guy as a ground worker. He worked great the first 2 weeks, didn't complain, seemed to know the work, and I paid him well. The third week working for me, we did a job that consisted of 2 big box elders to be removed. It was 95 degrees that day. I told the guys, don't push yourselves too much, make sure you're getting enough fluids, and if you need a break, take one. The new guy drove his own vehicle to the job as he needed to leave that day 40 minutes early to make it to a dental appointment. We're like 40 minutes into the job and I notice he's moving really slow. Just looked really unmotivated and like he didn't want to be there. We had the customer's driveway blocked off with brush everywhere. At this point, I'm still climbing in the tree and I see the new guy driving through the customer's yard, which was like 2 acres, and then onto the road in a serious hurry. I called him probably 30 times to make sure everything was all right. Didn't hear back from him. My other employees had no idea and were in shock. They saw him hop in his truck and just dart. He decided right then and there, frick this, and just left. Still haven't heard from him to this day. I didn't terminate him. That's the closest I would have come to firing someone. I don't know if I would have fired him if he'd showed up again the next day, but he would have had to do some pretty good explaining with a sincere apology for not letting anyone know and having the rest of the guys pick up the slack. My construction company was building a new addition on a hospital. One morning, the president of the hospital called to inform me that he had just watched one of our laborers doing smack in his truck while on break. Went to the job site, talked to the kid. He said, "Yeah, but I waited till break time." You aren't supposed to drive your personal vehicle to the job site for liability reasons. Oh yeah, and you're not supposed to do smack, even on a break. We've had some winners over the years, but that kid took the cake. This was definitely one of those situations that was not funny when it happened, but is hilarious now. One employee was dealing white snow from the back door. Another was high on smack and nodding off while standing over a fryer. Another went off on an admittedly rude customer and got real mean. Your wife must be sorry she married you. One called me an N-word, I'm white, and spat at me when I confronted him about the fact that his dad came in to say hi to him when he was out of work because his dad had a heart attack and was in the hospital. And one just sat in the dining room and refused to go back to work because a hockey game was on TV. Restaurant management is fun. I was a blacksmith at a federal historical site and I used to make nails as a demonstration. I didn't see this, but another blacksmith was making nails and a lady remarked, "They didn't have nails back then, 17th century," to which the blacksmith replied, "Yeah, right, lady, they scotch-taped Christ to the cross." What terrible specimens have you had to endure for roommates? 3 weeks before I was to move out of a place, my replacement moved in. My roommate had apparently told her it was okay. So now 3 people lived in an apartment meant for 2. From what I could tell, all she did was sit on the couch and watch TV. A week before I was to move out, a friend of mine came over to help me pack. Apparently, the replacement thought I was moving out that day and that she could finally move into my room instead of sleeping in a common area. When she found out that wasn't the case, she got upset with my friend. Over the next week, she asked me repeatedly, "So when are you moving out?" I told her it would be at the end of the month because I couldn't move into my apartment until then. She said I should move out sooner. What I think happened is my roommate told her I was moving out the prior month and that I was overstaying my welcome. FYI, your former roommate was collecting double rent. That's usually pretty illegal. Mine told me not to bring my friends over because Asian people made her uncomfortable. One roommate would leave the house without their keys, not because they forgot them, but because he didn't like having keys. Ever. The request was to stop locking the door when I left the house. This is the second time I've read this. Like, do these people want to be robbed? I'll never trust someone like this. I feel like it's an elaborate plot to steal your stuff. Leave the door unlocked when you go out. Okay. And then they take your stuff with their friends. When I was in the dorms in college, I roomed with this dude who I didn't know. The guy played football and was about 300 plus pounds. Well, the problem is he wouldn't shower. Ever. Like no fricking joke. Our room smelled like hot mayonnaise and BO. I would spray and clean. Well, eventually, I got nose blind. This mother fricker finally got a girl to come to the room. When she asked him why it stank, I heard him whisper, "It's him." I fricking blew up. I asked old girl whose side looked like it would stink. My side was spotless, while his was full of half-eaten food and sweaty clothes. She ended up agreeing and leaving. The only cleaning he did was when he would come home from practice, take off his sweaty clothes, and then proceed to Febreze them and then go and take a nap. Luckily, the room was really big. Finn. I died inside when you said it smelled like hot mayo. You have my utmost sympathy as someone who hates mayo with every fiber of my being. And that guy sounds like a fricking douche. I probably couldn't live with the gentleman in question here, and frankly, I don't understand how anyone could. Surely there's someone you can go to and complain in the dorm situation like this. She told me I needed to stay somewhere else overnight because her new boyfriend was staying for the first time. I said if she had given me more notice, then I could maybe have sorted something, but she had told me 2 hours before I needed to leave. So what did you do? I told her I'd go out for some food, then when I came back I was happy to stay in my room. She shouted a lot about how unreasonable I was being, but that was still what I did. My freshman year in college, he insisted on having 2 box fans placed in our window, one facing in, one facing out, in order to circulate the air. Seems like no big deal, right? Until you realize that he insisted they be on full power every night of the year. Didn't matter if it was 100 degrees outside or -10. My bed was the closest to the window, and if I tried to get up to turn them off, he'd get hostile as frick. Frick that guy. Shove one fan up his butt and the other down his throat to circulate the air. 1% evil, 99% hot air. I use window fans, still do, even in January. I love and need very cold, moving air while sleeping. Sophomore year, my best friend at college really wanted to room with me. I knew my cold air thing would be a problem because every other girl I've ever met likes it very hot in their room, like 70+ degrees Fahrenheit. Like my freshman roommate kept it at 90 degrees plus, and she would crack the window to keep the radiators going at 90 degrees Fahrenheit. It was just horrible. Anyway, so I knew this would be a problem. I told my friend no, I wanted to live alone. She insisted she loved to sleep with window fans too, she loved the cold, blah blah blah. She kept asking for weeks. Eventually I said yes to rooming with her, with the clear understanding that I'd be using my window fan all year. Well, we roomed together and I used my fan, and January rolled along with frigid temperatures. My friend suddenly stopped speaking to me. I would ask her what's wrong and she didn't answer. She acted like I didn't exist. This lasted a couple of months before I remembered she had told me she had a blog. I looked up her blog and saw many posts dating back months complaining about what an awful person I am for freezing her to death with my window fan and how much she hates me for it. I was pretty surprised because she had never said anything. As soon as I read the blog, I asked her about it and she flipped out, went to the dean saying I'd invaded her privacy for reading her blog, and asked to be moved to a different room. She moved out and she never spoke to me again. So anyway, similar story to yours. I hope I wasn't the butthole here. I also wrote her a nice, long Facebook message right before graduation wishing her well, telling her what I admired about her and how she'd do great in life, and apologizing for losing her friendship sophomore year, but she never wrote back. I'm still puzzled. The fact that there is someone out there who can think they are rationally calling you the bad guy and hate you for this really concerns me. What the frick? When you repeatedly warn someone about it, they do it, and find out you're right, someone is a butthole and it isn't you. I have the master bedroom with the bathroom, and pay $65 more a month for this. My roommate, whose room is on my side of the house, gets to use my bathroom because we agreed he could. He lets his one-night stands and drunk friends walk through my room when I'm not there to use that bathroom, rather than the other one closer to the front door. I'm now missing 2 phone chargers and a pair of $100 headphones, but I'm missing them because I must have misplaced them. Can you buy a lock for your door? After that, our agreement would change. Not really a roommate, but a little stepbrother. He's 12. He wants to rotate beds from week to week. So I sleep in my bed, then the next week my stepbrother's bottom bunk, then the next week his top bunk. I don't want to sleep in either one of your beds, that's why it's called my bed. Just go to sleep. Explain to him that your sheets are full of your dead skin, farts, drool, pee, dribble, and that's why he shouldn't want to sleep in your bed. Then explain that his bed is full of his dead skin, farts, drool, pee, dribble, and that's why it's gross of him to ask you to sleep there. Well, now I don't even want to sleep in my bed. On move-out day, my sophomore year of college, I was cleaning my half of the dorm room. Mind you, the room had been a mess before. Both me and my roommate were very messy people, so the mess itself didn't bother us much. So cleaning my half took quite a while. But by the end of it, all of my stuff was packed in my car and I was ready to go. When I was done, my roommate said, "I'll have my stuff packed up in about an hour." I asked her why she was telling me that, and she said it was so I could finish cleaning. I took one look at her, set down the bag of cleaning supplies, and said, "Here's all the stuff you need." Then I turned in my key and left. Like heck I'm going to stay behind an hour later than I needed to mop the floor and clean the surfaces of your side of the room, when you did jack all to help me. Handed me $50 while asking me to get them green herb while they owed me $700 in back rent. Now they owe you $650 and still need green herb. Had a roommate in college who refused to take his keys with him when he went out to the bar because he didn't want a lump in his pocket. He would then come home after everyone else was already asleep, and when the doors were locked, he would start pounding on the door and shouting, "This is bullcrap! I frickin' live here!" until he woke someone up and got them to go downstairs and let him in. Oh, frick me, that would not fly. Oh, he would though, right down the fricking stairs. Yep, for me, the net result of that situation would be the purchase of some noise-cancelling headphones and a grumpy flatmate the next morning, because there's no way I'm getting up on a regular basis for a moron like that. Oh, I had a neighbor like that in a building once. At least once a week, for more months than I can remember, he had come home drunk in the wee hours, beating on his door and screaming until his roommate let him in. One night he was so drunk he decided pulling the fire alarm was the best way to get his roommate to open the door. I wasn't invited to the blanket party that was held for him by some of the other building residents after he did that, but he moved out very quickly afterwards. What's a blanket party? When a group of people beat someone with bars of soap in a blanket, it's usually used on someone who's hampered or held back or teed off an entire group. It's a percussive attitude adjustment tool. We had several rooms and one was huge, meant for 2 or 3 people. It had a sink and 2 walk-in closets. After signing the lease, she announced that she needed the giant room to herself because she had PTSD and OCD. She wouldn't explain herself any further and threw a passive-aggressive tantrum for a month when we refused to cram ourselves into the 2 tiny rooms with 4 people so that she could have the big one to herself. We told her that she could be in the big room with another roommate, but she didn't want that. She just chose the small room eventually. We never heard the end of it either. It was always our fault that she was late to school because she didn't have a private bathroom and crap. Before you ask, yes, this person was in therapy, but according to her, she was in therapy because she needed to learn to be selfless and put herself first. She had frequently used that as an excuse to be selfish. My therapist thinks I need to put myself first. I roomed with another girl that was like this, but at least it was just me and her. She claimed because of her OCD and obsessive shopping, she needed a bigger room with the private bathroom and large closet. So I got the small room and shared the bathroom with guests and her, since it was closer to the living room and everyone used it if they were over. Since she used that bathroom too, I had to maintain it to a very high cleanliness standard for her. Meanwhile, her private bathroom was a pigsty. I had to pay 50-50 rent to get a much smaller room and share a bathroom. I was out of there when the lease ended the following year. Mental illness isn't an excuse to be a jerk. Ugh, I agree. It's an insult to the millions of mentally ill people who are perfectly nice and considerate. Your roommate sounds terrible. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a roommate who moved out without warning about 2 months before my lease was up. She pretty much disappeared and left most of her stuff in the apartment. She also didn't pay up for her remainder of the rent. 3 years later, I get a phone call from her. I'm living 1,500 miles away and have been in several different apartments in several different states during the interim. She says I need to ship all of her furniture and belongings immediately. What do you mean you dragged everything out to the curb the week after I left? You're a terrible roommate. You owe me for the value of my things. I stopped answering her calls and eventually she gave up. I would have sold them all. Well, her stuff wasn't even that nice. Mine was adamant that I tried doing the deed with him. For clarification, I'm a straight guy and I didn't know he was gay. He said that I might like it, but I'd never know if I didn't try it. I've had that phrase used on me too, from my best friend at the time. How do you know you're not gay if you've never done anything gay? How did you react? I kinda froze up and stammered something about how painful it would be without lube. Then I left. I don't think his family thinks much of me anymore because I didn't visit him in hospital a couple of months later when he was in a coma. I don't think they know their son wanted me to top him either, so I don't blame them for being mad at me. I'd planned to spend my birthday evening quietly reading and watching Italian murder mysteries. Roommates announced that I needed to go make plans because they were having friends over and didn't want it to be awkward. The friends they were inviting were always so incredibly rude to me. So I smiled and said, sure, I'll make plans, and invited 3 of our neighbors and half of my creative writing class to eat cake and watch Italian murder mysteries. My crappy roommates had to go to their friend's apartment instead. He was a germaphobe and a bit stupid. He wanted all the other housemates to completely scrub the tub with cleanser after we took a shower, so he wouldn't come into contact with butt wash water or something else. We laughed at him and told him he could disinfect the tub himself before he showered if he was so worried. If someone has a problem like that, I'd happily spray down the shower after use. Just a small thing, but fricking scrubbing the entire bathtub? Frick that. Not me or any roommate situation I've had, but you know when you've had a friend complain about something and you only hear their side of the story? If you still think they're wrong, they must be extra wrong, right? My friend told me that her roommate forgot his keys at home one night. This sucks because he works late. He rings the doorbell, she wakes up all angry, opens the window and says, "Oh, that's too bad, but it's late. Go back to your office and sleep." Rather than just accept his apology and open the door, she told him to go back to his workplace, sleep there, and just come home some other time. She was telling me the story as if I'd be like, wow, the nerve of this guy trying to come home. Instead, my initial reaction was, man, that's freaking annoying that he woke you up, which very quickly changed to, what the whole frick is wrong with you though, by the end of the story. Not yet a roommate, but started making outrageous demands. There was a time I was leasing out the spare bedroom of my home and there were a few weird, crazy requests I got. An elderly lady thought the room for rent also included me taking care for her as a caregiver and driving her around. She also demanded I install ADA ramp on my porch. A couple who was so sure I would select them as a roommate, I told them of my no pets policy, went to my yard and started to plan out how they plan to fence off a section for their doggy. Hello lady, this is my home. They got mad when I told them I was turning down their application. FYI, I have nothing against dogs, I have cats that happen not to play well with others, hence the no pet policy. Had an actual roommate that refused to pay the bill because she was broke and would close the door on me and expected me to pay for her part. Yet she was out all night partying and getting expensive weaves. She left her email open at my PC and I saw the cost. Told her I can't pay her part and she'll get evicted if the rent is not paid on time. She left a week later. You'd think the crazies would have it in their best interest to hide their eccentricity right up until the move-in. In my experience, that's what they usually do anyway. I moved into our first 3-person dorm room, so I picked the prime bed. None of us knew each other before this, we were all in a bind for housing, and lo and behold, she and her family shows up and gives me the stink for having the gall to take the good bed. I get along really well with my other roommate, but this girl started using all of our stuff and staring at us when we slept or did homework. We got ants because she never cleaned the kitchen, but she would hide dirty plates and bad food in the back of the very deep pantry instead of cleaning or throwing it away. She wouldn't let us have friends over but felt the need to talk loudly on the phone at all hours. I lost it when she left a pair of sweatpants on the floor of our shared closet with actual crap in them. We searched for a different room for her and made her move out. I still have the hate letter she wrote me the day after she left. I met my first roommate on Craigslist. First red flag, I guess. I wasn't allowed to keep my music above volume 10 after 9 or 10 p.m. She, however, sang gospel songs loudly in the living room until 4 or 5 in the morning. Every single day. I had to open my mail in front of her, otherwise she'd open it because it looked important. Aside from this being totally illegal, why the frick do you need to read my bank statements? She'd text me when I got Amazon packages. "Oh, your shoes got here," because she'd open it and dig around before I got a chance to. She never cleaned, as in her mother still came over every weekend to clean her bedroom and bathroom. She had let her trash accumulate near her spot on the couch throughout the week. Clearly didn't give a crap about her living environment, but God forbid I put the television remote anywhere besides the right arm of the couch. I wasn't allowed to turn the heat on in the winter, to save money. I live in the mountains of North Carolina and the winters are pretty harsh. She would rather freeze than pay an extra $15 per month. Over the summer though, I wasn't allowed to open the windows, so no one breaks in. My apartment was either in the 50s, 60s, or the 80s. She didn't like it when I used the kitchen to cook, strange, but she would hand wash her period panties in the kitchen sink, even though we each had a private bathroom. Frick you, Rebecca. I had one roomie announce one day that he was going to stop paying his share of the rent. I explained that no rent equals no room. He thought that was unreasonable and went around telling people I was cold. What a butthole. He wanted his girlfriend to move in rent-free. This girl used my cookware and never cleaned it. She took forever in the shower. We put an end to that real quick. My current roommate. I own the house and did a buttload of work to clean out the garage so I could turn it into a man cave. He did absolutely jack to help, and most of the work was cleaning up piles of recycling he never took out. Now it's cleared he wants to park his car in there. But there's actual stuff taking up half the garage, so he would only be able to park in there while the other roommate and I park on the street and not use the driveway so that he can get in and out. He thinks I'm being unfair by not letting him park in there. Also, he cooks and never cleans, and has more than once let leftovers rot in my Tupperware and then thrown it out instead of cleaning it and not replaced it. This happens every time I move in with someone. Every single time. They tell me I don't do any dishes ever, which is very true. What I have to keep reminding them is that I have one plate, one bowl, one fork, one knife and one spoon. Keep them in my room at all times. Always wash them immediately after I'm done using them and bring them right back into my room. Always hilarious to hear their response. Listen guys, I have one single cup that I drink from every single day. I wash it before I fill it up for the day. I wash my pots and pans right after I'm done cooking, and my plates and silverware after I eat. The other 14 dirty glasses on the counter and sink full of week-old dishes are yours, and I'm not fricking washing them for you. I absolutely hate when people rotate who does the dishes, and then your dumb as frick roommates manage to use 4 glasses, all the pots and pans, and every available piece of silverware in like 5 hours. What in the holy frick are you cooking that makes so many pots and pans? Had an actress roommate who on random Saturdays and Sundays said she needed the entire apartment to herself to study her lines. I rarely had anyone over to begin with, as I was usually out and about, but this particular Sunday there were like 4 of us in the living room watching Mythbusters. I only include this to show that it's not like we were watching NFL and screaming or shouting or being drunk. She legitimately thought this was not okay and that everyone else should leave to accommodate her. Anyone who thinks like this should live by themselves. I'll never understand how people who want to split costs to save money still think people should accommodate them. When I have roommates, I realize that if I want peace and quiet, I sometimes need to remove myself and go to the library or something. That's the price you pay to save money. It wasn't my roommate's unreasonable demand, but it was my roommate thinking my request was an unreasonable demand. My roommate and I rented a house together and the garage was pretty close to the living room. One day I was watching TV when I heard what sounded like something smashing into the garage. I waited a few seconds and went outside to see that my roommate had hit the garage with his truck and was chilling in his car texting. His car was still touching the garage. I told him to back up and he got really upset that I'd asked him to do that. Luckily, the damage was minimal, but what the frick, man? When I was a freshman in college, I lived in a dorm suite with 4 other girls, 3 single rooms and 1 double, which I shared with a roommate. One of the girls who lived in the single rooms was a real piece of work. Every slight change in the suite would drive her nuts, and she'd always be knocking on our door demanding an explanation for some minute thing or another. One time she knocked on my door only to show me a tiny scrap of ham and a piece of cereal pinched between her fingers. There was meat and Cookie Crisp on the kitchen floor. "Is this yours?" "Yes," I said. "You can throw those away." I also came home to her crying in the living room once because of another of our suite mates put a monster poster on the front door for a Halloween decoration, and it scared her. I guess those things don't sound too crazy out of context, but she'd knock to tell me she'd moved my food from the table to the counter and just general tiny stuff like that. Very strange. Parents, when did you realize it wasn't just teenage hormones? Your kid was just a bad person. My parents are realizing what I've known about my sister for years now. She's on the hook for $60,000 in student loans and such, after failing out of 2 colleges for rampant drinking, and refuses to do so much as her exit counseling for them. Parents have co-signed everything, and Mum says that every call she makes there ends in shouting because it's screwing up their credit. Because she lives a couple of states away from them now, she thinks she can get away with it. Mum says they're thinking of taking her to court over it. My sister was in this situation a few years ago. I fully sympathize with you and your family. In the end, we threatened to take her to court over the damages she caused to the household and credit, and it scared her into behaving. In the end, however, she nearly ended up in prison, did community service, moved to a different country. I saw her for the first time in years a couple of months ago, and she's finally grown up. She's now 28. Finally. My dad makes a good living that allows my mum to be a stay-at-home mum. As a stay-at-home mum, my mum's only real job is to be the maternal figure of the house. Needless to say, she goes all out. Well, in elementary school, my mum would pack me and my brother extravagant bag lunches, amazing sandwiches with all the cookies and chips any middle schooler would love. One day, my mum started to notice that my little brother was coming home super hungry after school and that he had eaten all of his lunch, yet he was still dying of hunger every day at 3 o'clock when he would walk through the door. My mum asked him why he was so hungry and she suspected he was getting bullied and his food was getting taken by some of the older kids at school. He's pretty small. Well, since he didn't say anything, my mum called his teacher and had her look out for him. My mum got a startling call not more than a week after her inquiry. My younger brother was gathering the fat, poor, hungry kids who didn't have money or were still hungry for food and was putting on a hunger talent show. He would make the fat kids dance for his food and the poor kids do weird jackass-like stunts for it. When my mum heard, she was devastated. She had spawned a real little butthole. Years later, he's a successful lawyer with a beautiful family, but still a fricking butthole. Your brother is President Snow? At first, I thought this was going to be a story of him donating his lunch to the less fortunate and was wondering how that made him into a butthole. My brain had trouble fathoming the depravity of the reality of this story. That he turned out to be a lawyer is no surprise. When he was 3 years old, I was napping on the couch when he came up, opened a bottle of water I had next to me, poured it on my crotch, and asked me why I'd peed myself. I mean, that's definitely not teenage hormones. Given that I anticipate a lot of tragic stories of broken families, toxic relationships, and general depressing content in this thread, I thought I should include this monster who soaked their parents' crotch. I'm sure there's like a 50-50 shot that they aren't the devil reincarnated. When my mum called me asking if I could track down my sister's baby because she had abandoned it. My sister has 5 kids, 2 were with their father, but she had the other 3 with other people. My mum got a call from the twins' babysitter saying she hadn't heard from my sister in a few days, and was wondering when my sister would be coming to pick her kids up. My mum called around and no one could find my sister or the baby. So she went to pick up the twins and their babysitter suggested that the baby might be with a woman whose name she could only partially remember, but who she'd heard was babysitting the baby from time to time. So my mum frantically called me asking if I could use the magic of the internet to track this lady down. I used online yellow pages, Facebook connections, and just cold calling a lot of the people asking, "Do you have a baby?" I finally got a hold of the right person who said, "I was just about to call the cops. I thought I was going to be babysitting for a few hours and it's been 2 days. My mum went and picked him up, and my sister hadn't even dropped off any clothes with him. In conclusion, my sister basically just said, "This is too much pressure for me," arranged for babysitters for the 3 kids, and left town. My mother was convinced at that moment that she had raised a sociopath. My mum forced her to have her tubes tied, and then won the custody of the baby, and the babysitter of the twins became their foster parents and will probably ultimately adopt them. My sister got remarried and joined the army. We're all just waiting for her to either get kicked out, start cheating on the new guy, or whatever. My grandson is in kindergarten. Last week he threw his lunchbox at his teacher because he wanted to see what would happen. Journal entry for March 1st, 2013. Week-long detention hypothesis confirmed. As I discussed last week, I hypothesized that throwing a lunchbox at my teacher's skull would result in at least a week detention. Not only was that confirmed, but I was also grounded at home. I suspect the adults have some sort of reason to prevent injury, an odd custom. I propose that other weapons beside a lunchbox would elicit a similar response. Regardless, this was a small sample size. I plan on recruiting other children in other classes to test this hypothesis. Of course, we will need to double-blind these experiments as well. Next week, I will try a knife. I did similar stuff as a young child. I'd throw crap at people or hit people to get a reaction, but that all changed when I threw a snowball at a bigger kid who proceeded to shove my face in a snow mound. I was 5. He was also 5, but bigger. When my cousin slapped our grandmother, for no reason. For those wondering, this cousin is male. Also, I wasn't there to witness it, but family members referenced it. His apparent reason was, "She was bugging me." That's not much of a reason to me, so I just say he's being a butthole. He's my fiance's kid, but he lives with us, and I deal with him 80% of the time. I knew shortly after I met him 2 years ago what a butthole he is. He's constantly lying about stupid crap. He is entirely self-absorbed, he screams and rages over the dumbest stuff, and threatens to take his own life if you try to make him do the dishes. He got expelled from school for threatening to shiv a kid with a broken pair of scissors because that kid asked him a question. He then proceeded to tell us that the principal was a lying B-word and that she and all the other children at school were trying to frame him. As far as he's concerned, the entire world is out to get him, and everyone else is fricked up, and if you call him on his crappy behavior, he threatens to take his own life. Take yours, or call the cops to frame you for inappropriate behavior with a minor. He's a butthole to the extreme and no one really wants anything to do with him because of it. We've had therapists that have literally refused to see him again after only 1 or 2 sessions. He's 12. My son, who was 25 at the time, blamed me for his unemployment because I spent too much money on him when he was a child. My older sister cheats on her husband constantly, is rude as frick at almost all times, and has been this way for her entire life. My mother still refuses to acknowledge that she's a legitimate butthole and always has been. Does her husband know? If not, are you considering telling him? I should have clarified, the husband knows. He knows everything. It's a strange situation. My sister is a user. She spent months, years back on MySpace, looking for a husband. Basically, she used her time to look for someone to take care of her. She's always been very manipulative and sort of the black sheep of our family. Anyway, she wrangled herself an Air Force guy. My sister is an attractive lady, but her husband is most definitely not a good-looking guy, and I'm positive that she's used this as an angle of sorts to keep this ruse going. She doesn't do crap, but spends his money and cheats on him. And because he's too much of an insecure pansy, he won't take charge and leave her. Worst part of all is now there's a gosh darn child involved. Fricking A. I don't know if my 13-year-old is a butthole just yet, but last week he was suspended for running up to a kid at school who wasn't looking and smacked him across the face super hard, while he was videotaping it with his phone, no less, and then uploaded it to Vine and Twitter. And then he said he was just joking around. I'm also starting to think he's a little dumb because we live in Steubenville, Ohio, and if there's one thing the kids there should have learned, it's that you get in a ton of trouble for doing illegal things involving social media. That was a trend in the UK about 5 years ago, except it was called happy slapping. Sometimes the best love is tough love. If you keep giving him the benefit of the doubt, he can get away with it and will continue to do that in the future. My little brother is a butthole and my parents know it, and to keep him from having a fit, spoil him all the time. Fit as in foot stomping, blood-curdling screams, cursing, etc. He's 13. I despise him greatly. The narrator is hoping for the sake of these families that just for the general spoilt behavior, 13 is still a little too young to judge whether the kid is a lost cause yet. I say this specifically because there seem to be a lot of 13-year-olds in these stories. Case in point, I have a 13-year-old grandson that we moved 750 miles to help raise because our daughter passed away. At first we thought he was just having a hard time coping, as we all were, but lately the non-appreciative attitude and the you owe me attitude has been very loud and disrespectful. No matter what he gets or doesn't get, it's never enough. His demands are not those of a normal child. We raised 4 and assisted some with all the grandkids. He speaks to us like he's grown and never gets quiet or even attempts to show respect and listen to what we have to say. 13 and wondering every day. I'm a teacher who works with middle schoolers every day. Remind them that the only thing they're entitled to is the air they breathe and maybe some food to keep them alive, and clothing to keep their body temperature from lowering below 98 degrees. And if he acts like a butthole, take away everything except for the essentials. Kids who think they're owed everything grow up to be adults to think the same way. Not so cute when you're 30 with the maturity of a 7th grader. And if you do this, be very matter-of-fact about it. Not angry. They sense anger as weakness and try to push your buttons. Be calm as though you're talking about the weather, and no matter what, follow through. The one time you don't will be your downfall. My stepson has autism, which makes it tricky because sometimes autism can look like behaving like a butthole in certain circumstances where social skills are a challenge for them. But the truth is that people with autism have good personalities or bad personalities, just like anyone, and my stepson is a butthole. He's a selfish bully who looks for victims. He takes his anger out only on people who cannot or will not fight back. He has fantasies about violence with children smaller than him. He's come after me with a butcher knife. On and on. He's a lot like his biological dad, who lost custody of his kids because he slugged his little girl and threatened to take his wife's life. He's an administrator at a Christian college, by the way. My stepson is out of the house and in a home group now. I really loved him. I tried so hard to help him. We got so much professional help, and yet he is who he is. Good parenting can do a lot, bad parenting can too. But in the end, you just are who you are. Any changes that can be made need to come from you. Nobody can do it for you. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My son is only 10 and is in no way a butthole, but my father had 7 kids. I remember him saying, "You have until the age of 12 to teach your kids. After that, they become buttholes for the next 10 years. This thread is making me love birth control even more than I already did. My wife and I are still hoping it's the hormones and not his lifelong personality. When I was in high school, I was showing my mum a few signatures in my yearbook. There was one signature that I had gotten as a joke. The guy was not popular or attractive, followed me around like a puppy, had gross habits. I was telling my mum about the guy and was laughing about getting him to sign my yearbook. My dad overheard all of this and said, "You're a fricking jerk butthole, girl. You're the butthole girl who everyone secretly hates. Frick you for treating that guy like that. That's really something to be proud of, you jerk." I felt guilty about my actions toward the guy ever since. As an adult, I go out of my way to not do the popular thing and to not follow others, to not treat people differently. I was trying to be popular that time in high school by treating someone like scum, and my dad changed my entire outlook on life by pointing it out and by yelling at me that evening. I don't have kids, so I thought I'd point out the moment when I was the jerk. I was actually in the reverse of this situation, realizing that my parent was a legitimate butt. I was bullied in school quite a bit as a kid. During that time, I wasn't living with my parents, I was living with my grandparents. When I moved back in with my mother, I realized how differently she acted behind closed doors than I was used to. Emotional bullying, PMDD, anger management issues, hormonal imbalance. I started to ask about her childhood. She told me stories about how she and her best friend would terrorize people and bully other girls in school. In one example, leaving dog crap in a birthday gift box at the foot of a girl they particularly liked to torment, until she eventually transferred. She had a few stories like that she would tell with a laugh like they were totally normal and hilarious. In conclusion, my mum is the answer to the question, what becomes of the childhood bully? My friend is one of these legitimate buttholes. His parents are very nice people. I get on great with them. The problem lies that they were very fortunate in life with money and never put their foot down with my friend. He always got his own way. If he wanted something, he got it. He refused to go to university, but his parents really wanted him to. He then went to uni on the basis that they would pay for a year's travel expenses for him. A term into uni, he got his parents to buy him a car, otherwise he would drop out. I put friend at the top because he's actually a really nice guy up until his teenage years. It was around this time that his dad's business rocketed. My other friend and I are only friends with him because sometimes he can still be nice. We give him crap about being horrible to his parents though, and he doesn't take it on board. Maybe the combination of his puberty hormones and parents' wealth happening at the same time wasn't a good thing for him. We all have that friend who transforms into a flowering prick overnight. What's worse is that they go on to live successful lives, until they crash and burn at 33 because they have no real friends. My mum's just figured this out with my little brother. He's 18 and just moved to uni. Me and him haven't gotten along for a long time. My mum has defended him for years, claiming he's just fiercely independent and enjoys his privacy, but I've considered the behavior obnoxious for a long time. If you ask about how he is, he flips out because it's not your business. If you have a conversation and he disagrees with you with something, he will not respond to any evidence that supports you and will belittle and patronize. Yeah, sure it is. Oh yeah, right. But that's just how he is. He has zero empathy. If something is going wrong in someone's life, he becomes Mr. Hindsight. Absolutely emotionless and again, condescending and belittling. There is no such thing as opinion or grey areas in his world. If he's seen someone's life go to crap through green herb use, then all green herb use is terrible and the medical Mary J idea is bullcrap. If he likes a band, they're good, and if you disagree, not only are you wrong, but you're a little piece of crap he's found on his carpet. But he just can't communicate very well. He doesn't really mean what he's saying. Try and listen better. So he went to uni and hasn't called my mum except to ask her for help moving from one room to another. She is obviously worried. He's the baby and now her and dad have an empty nest and she misses him. So she texts and emails at most once a day, just asking, "How are you?" rather than calls. She doesn't want to disturb him. She doesn't get replies usually, but then she's got this horrible email back. "Stop trying to invade my life. You're not involved anymore. It's none of your business. Just leave me alone." I think she's realized that it may just be how he is. But how he is a butthole. She's still trying to defend him a little, but when I talk to her, it's easy to hear the hurt in her voice. She's always been there for this little brat, much to my annoyance, as she's always sided with him in arguments. "I know he's yelled at you for the last 30 minutes, but did you ask him how school was?" But hearing her this upset is awful. I think she's always hoped that once he got more independence, he'd relax a bit. He always felt trapped in our hometown, but it's gone the other way. I honestly don't think he has any intention of being part of the family again. He's previously told me that if I or he ever have kids, they're probably not going to meet each other, and that looking after my parents is probably going to be my responsibility. I don't overly mind, but I know it's going to kill my mum. Yeah, I knew that there would be a lot of sad stories like this when I picked the story group, and here is maybe our most detailed example. Heartbreaking. I have a son who I thought was a butthole from a very early age. He could give you a look at age 2 that made you deep down want to punt him like a football. Like it triggered some old, deep part of the brain that we don't use anymore and actually made you angry just by this look he'd give you. After a while, it no longer bothered me. I figured he was just born a butthole. Then at age 6, after many specialists and tests, he was diagnosed with Asperger's. With proper treatment and understanding, he's now only casually a butthole, but getting better. I started reading this out of curiosity. Funny how so many are not from parents, but from siblings and other relatives. My cousin supposedly locked herself in the bathroom after an argument with my uncle, called the cops and claimed that he, along with my aunt, were being physically inappropriate. She asked to be removed from the home and she was moved into a foster family. She still came to all family holidays and insisted on sleeping in my room. I have a trundle bed, so a spare bed underneath my bed, and she would wait until I left the room and would steal from me. On 2 separate occasions, my MP3 player and my Game Boy Color, along with all the games, were stolen. She lived 4 hours away, so when my aunt eventually found them, I had to wait for them to be mailed back to me. She was a proclaimed animal activist and vegetarian. Only when it was convenient to her, though. I've been a vegetarian for 9 years and we always had veggie food in our house. She was always just an awful person. I've been planning my wedding for almost a year now. She got engaged and within a month, she stole my future wedding date. Seeing a lot of the stories here, I'm recognizing myself at that age, and I feel like it's worth reassuring the parents in this thread that it may not always be like that. Looking back, there are so many things I did in middle school and high school that I really regret, and that I feel terrible about now. I could have easily been considered a butthole, I think. I'm now in my 4th year of university, and I consider myself to be a much better person than I was back then. I know that I caused my parents a lot of grief then, but seeing how things between us have gotten better makes me happy. So you shouldn't give up hope at such an early age. Sometimes all it takes is for your kid to grow up and earn some experience in the real world. I saw the exact moment on my uncle's face when he realized his son was a butthole. He had been getting into trouble, little chicken crap stuff, then he gets busted for statutory. So my uncle, who used to be a police officer, calls in every favor he can to get the charges dropped. He hated what his son did, but it was his son and still felt he had to look out for him. Then, the very night his charges are dropped, the moron goes out and gets arrested again for the same crime. No help the second time. Now he deals blackjack at a casino and has a gambling problem. The tragedy is, he used to have so much potential. My parents told me that I was a crappy kid my whole life. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that I was able to reflect on this and realize they were just narcissistic buttholes who don't like children. My dad used to tell me I was the most selfish person he knew. I did the family laundry, cooked the meals, cleaned, got all A's in school, and never did drinking or substances. Sorry I sometimes needed time alone. I realized my younger brother was a butthole when he was 3 years old. He had been hitting, biting, kicking, and generally bullying my 2-year-old brother, and my dad's response was, "Boys will be boys." Anyway, my 3-year-old brother was mad at the youngest for some reason. He pushed the baby onto the tile floor and proceeded to take violent action against him. Needless to say, the baby was rushed to the ER, where my dad claimed the baby had just fallen over. This sort of abuse is still happening. They're 15 and 16 now. The only difference is my dad tells the oldest not to leave marks because CPS has been called multiple times throughout their childhood. One time I caught the oldest trying to engage in inappropriate behavior with the other, and I was so angry I beat the crap out of him. I told my family and was going to call the cops, but they informed me if I called the cops, I was dead to them. The butthole is the golden boy and can do no wrong. He's the spitting image of my psychotic father. I thought my 13-year-old was up to some crap. A couple of days ago, I saw him unlock his phone. He went to practice and I gave in to curiosity. He's actually a really nice and cool nerd. I figured I was already a crappy parent for looking, so I browsed it all. Texts, Facebook, and Instagram. It was all chatter about sports, video games, and horse masks. His pics were of his siblings and passed away grandmother. I felt horrible for not trusting him. What blew prisoners' minds about life outside after serving long sentences? Marcelli was locked up for 20 years before he was in jail with me. He got locked up again for beating up somebody who was talking crap at a bus station. The guy he beat up was actually talking to someone else on a Bluetooth headset. About 10 years ago, I was unemployed and went to one of those employment centers looking for a job for the first time in a long time, which ended up basically being some sort of internet cafe where you use the computers to job search, create resumes, and other stuff. I sat down by an older gentleman who just stared into the screen with his hands in his lap. An employee came by and asked him if he needed help, to which he agreed and stated he had been incarcerated for about 30 years and had never used a computer. She sat down and told him to use the mouse to move the cursor to an icon, etc., etc. This dude gave the mouse a sharp jab with his finger like he was pushing an elevator button. That slid the mouse across the mousepad and onto the table. The look on the lady's face was priceless when she realized she had to teach this guy how to use a computer from ground fricking zero. She was puzzled where to even begin. My dad is a prison chaplain. One of his inmates had been in for about 30 years and got out last year. My dad got a call from him a few days later. "Chap, did you know they have toilets that flush themselves?" My mother just got released after a 15-year prison sentence. The weirdest thing to her is the cell phones. She thinks it's crazy that everyone is attached at the hip to their phones, and that you can look up anything in an instant. Also, gas prices. They definitely threw her for a loop. She offered to gas my vehicle up because I helped her run some errands. She didn't realize it was going to cost $50. She also thinks it's wild that my brothers and I can play games together and not be in the same house. The first time she called in and I told her I was playing Destiny 2 with my brothers, she thought they were actually in the living room with me. It still freaks her out that we live in different states and can play together. That one was posted in 2015 and is likely a result of equal parts the time locked away and the classic parents are confused by technology issue. Online games were still kind of a thing in the 90s and noughties. I was told this story by an ex-felon who had a cellmate that finally got released after 30-plus years in prison. He gave the guy his phone number because he knew that transitioning into the real world would be rough. He went on to say that he got a call from his cellmate at a grocery store in a corner, crying because the selection in the store was too much for him to handle. Mostly the different varieties of items, different brands have grown in the past 30-plus years. Also, the use of self-checkout machines can be confusing. I learned about this in Business 101 in college, that if you overwhelm your customer with too many options, it leads to lower sales. Sometimes that happens to me in a grocery store. Too many options, so I buy nothing. Like having a library of hundreds of Steam games, and after an hour of deciding and playing the first 5 minutes of a few, you play nothing and go back to Reddit. Saw a dude on the news who'd been in jail for like 50 or 60 years. He said the craziest thing was seeing all the crazy colored Gatorades. That, and he thought everyone was an FBI agent because of their earbuds. I remember working at McDonald's and having an ex-convict come in and being outraged at the prices. A Big Mac was twice the price he was used to. Not a felon, but I did have a lengthy phone call with an ex-con at work once where I went in circles trying to explain the concept of attachments to emails. I also had to explain that fax and email were separate things. What's she in for? You know how your mother always said, "I brought you into this world, I can take you out of it too"? Well, his mum tried it. Was at the corner store and some guy walks in with his buddy who was acting a little weird. He points to some Red Bull and asks, "What are those?" His buddy tells him, "They get you jacked, like amped up, get you going." His buddy left with like 5 of them. I'm assuming he just got out of lockup. It gave me a chuckle. I work with a lot of felons. One of them had been in prison for 38 years. He said everything is different. The cars are so different and quiet. Everyone is on their phones, and phones are weird. People have phones in their pockets. Vehicles definitely were a lot noisier in the older days, and street scenes were a bigger assault on your ears. I remember it from the early to mid-90s, and I've also seen archive footage from the 60s and 70s where it's slightly worse. 38 years presumably also means that he went from having never used a credit or debit card to a world where a lot of people don't carry cash and buy things online. I feel like long-term prison is actually a form of time travel. I went to rehab a few years ago, and one of the guys there with me just got out of prison after a 20-year sentence for being a huge crystal dealer. He said cell phones blew his mind, and he's so confused about gas pumps now because of the option to pay with cards at the pump and how different they look. Just wait until he sees one with a frickin' TV in it. I knew a guy who was in for around 15 years. I told him I like video games, and he was asking if I had a chance to play this or that game on PS2. I said I didn't, and he said I should get it. They weren't classics or anything, but sports games that came out at the time. In 2015, I met a guy who went into jail in 1997 and had just got out. The big thing he noticed was that there weren't many large groups of youth out and about like when he was a kid. He said the saddest thing he saw was going to the local park and seeing almost nobody there at 6 p.m. When he went in the 1990s, there were typically around 50 to 60 young people hanging out, skating around, and socializing. He said people weren't out on their stoops socializing as much. He doesn't see nearly as many people out and about on Friday and Saturday nights. I suppose the way we socialize has changed so much since then. Back then, the only way you could socialize was by leaving your house and hanging out with your friends. Even doing nothing with friends was preferable to just hanging out inside. Today, people don't do that as much. This is also the biggest thing for me. Youth used to be absolutely everywhere and aren't really out as much. The thing you said about parks and stoops is so true. Parks used to be always filled with large groups of young people aged 16 to 28. And now they're all empty or near empty. I don't know the reason why they aren't out, but youth culture in general just doesn't seem to be there the way it was in the 1990s. A reason is probably because parents nowadays don't want their kids running around at night, especially in winter. They don't want their children out late and without a parent watching them. Whenever I used to go to the park, it would always be before tea or it would be a lunch event with friends. Now, a lot of people will hang out with friends at shopping centers or at home because there's more stuff to do there. We have our consoles, which can have up to 4 players, but usually there'll be more people, so people will swap after a match. Haha, not even close to as long, but I was in jail before, during, and after the 2016 election, and it was weird to see people slowly finding out that Trump had become president. The police didn't tell anyone who had won, and we had to wait for all the new inmates to come in. Most people thought they were lying when they said Trump won, especially people who had been in since before Obama. I was in for 3 days back in '99. Last meal before I went in, McRib. I got out and the McRib was gone. I went for 2 months. When I went in, everyone was playing PS3. Got mine stolen, and when I got out, everyone was playing PS4, and I had neither. Can you imagine trying to understand memes? That's a long ride, man. The problem is that now they're just one inside joke inside of another inside joke inside of another inside joke. If you weren't there from the beginning, it's hopeless. I keep picturing the scene from Shawshank Redemption where Brooks is released from prison after decades of incarceration. The world has changed so much that he's overwhelmed and doesn't last long on the outside. I can't imagine how hard it must be to acclimatize if you don't have good support. That scene was so sad. If I remember the quote correctly, didn't he say he was in there for 50 years, released in 1955, and going into prison in 1905? Coming out after 2 world wars, television, radio, cars, and everything. That is an incredibly sad part of that movie. I don't know if more has changed for an inmate coming out who was incarcerated in the 90s, but the way we operate in society may have changed more, if anything, just by the influence of smartphones. Something about old guys looking at the world passing them by messes me up more than anything. I remember going down with my pops to get some ice cream a while back, and he just asked for a cone, and they asked him what kind he wanted, and he said he didn't know, so they just started listing off the whatever 40 flavors they had. And he just had this tragic, confused look on his face, and I remember leaving with him, and he said to me, "I don't even understand ice cream anymore." That crap makes me sad for some reason. Life is fleeting. Time goes by so quickly. I'm 40 now. That number messed with me for a while when I hit my birthday in January. 20 doesn't seem that far away. What messes with me now is music. There are no more decades to me. 80s, 90s, 2000s, sure. Everything after that is a mishmash of stuff. Man, I just turned 40 2 months ago. I feel you. For me, it's technology. I was always on the cutting edge. I ran a BBS from middle school all through the 90s, was into the pirate underground scene, was always building PCs and overclocking, and became a software dev and knew everything cool on the internet. Now it's all Snapchat and Instagram on phones, and the apps are so poorly designed and hard to navigate. Not to mention, so many of them harvest your metadata and user info, so it's downright scary to install any app. And new tech comes out so quickly I don't even care about it anymore. It feels bad, man. A friend of my dad's just got released a while back. He was in for about 8 years, and the other day he was talking to my dad about how vaping is so healthy for you, and he has individual ringtones for each of his contacts. He's hilarious, but we don't mention anything about how behind he is. It's not as extreme an amount of time as others, but you can still tell he's adapting. Wait, is it weird to have individual ringtones for people? Well, I'm an old young person, apparently. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I used to work in prison. I recall a lifer going out for the day and being mind-blown by ATMs and the moving conveyor belts at the supermarkets. Yeah, they probably don't know what Reddit is. To be fair, I don't exactly know what Reddit is either. No one can be told what Reddit is. You have to see it for yourself. My best friend just got out in January after 12 years. He can't handle the awesomeness of Netflix, also booking stuff online. I'm still teaching him Amazon. Oh, and you pick your seat at the movie theater. I'm not really over that yet either. He loves that YouTube now has a video for everything. You want to fix your golf swing? There's a video. Want to properly cut up a papaya or tie a certain kind of fly fishing lure? There's a video. Obviously, smartphones and whatnot have been a big difference, but the big difference to me is simply that I rarely see kids outside. Anyone who remembers the 80s and 90s remembers that past 5 p.m. there were groups of youth aging 16 to 28 literally roaming everywhere. I mean, just huge groups of youth standing around at corners, drinking and smoking. The parks were filled with them doing substances and whatnot, and after 9 p.m. blocks were basically overrun with youths. Parties were everywhere. Even the losers had zero trouble finding some crazy party to go to. I've been out for a while and I traveled all over the States. The one universal change I will say is that I rarely see that kind of youth culture anywhere anymore. I'm not sure if there are just 3/4 less kids or if the kids are just all inside now. Youth culture used to be in your face constantly. People used to stand on the street corners with boom boxes and have breakdance competitions, with plenty of substances passed around. I haven't seen anything remotely similar to that. Another thing is crime. Crime used to be everywhere. Even normal, well-to-do people knew about and were often even slightly engaged in some form of crime. They often had siblings that were into crime, or they knew neighbors who were into it. If you ever wanted anything extra done that was illegal, there was always guys you could go to. There was your normal life, then there was your sort of underground life. Almost everyone had one or knew plenty of people that were into it. I remember as a youth, me and my friends used to sell Lucy cigarettes and transport stolen goods from store to store for this seedy Italian guy on our block. In my early 20s, we used to help find guys to pay off landlords to let us throw parties on their rooftops. Everyone did this sort of stuff. That was considered kind of normal youth stuff back then. Today, that would seem like something only a serious criminal would do. Even our parents had their dealings with shady characters. Those are really the two biggest changes I've noticed anyway. The looks people give you when you say, "I only have cash." Not me, but a friend's older brother was in prison for 8 years from 2003 to 2011. He was most shocked about how movies had changed and how much detail they had now. Also, was shocked about computers. I met a guy who'd been in since the 90s and he kinda dressed and styled like Vanilla Ice when he got out. I think his dad still had all his clothes. I only served a couple of months back in 2015. I was released alongside a man who was in between 20 to 25 years. I forget exactly, but it was a lot. All of the people in my program were in great spirits after only being in for a couple of months. We had our girlfriends picking us up, talking about our plans, just bullcrapping around. This guy looked scared. As I wanted to leave every single one of my possessions behind, this guy had everything with him. A TV that still has the RCA connection, a CD player, all his clothes, some food, and a couple of shoes. He knew he was in for a shock. I have an employee who served 11 years. Coming back to real life is hard for these dudes. He won't go into a convenience store if it's too crowded. He can't handle himself around proper people because he's too desocialized. Oof. Not to devalue this man's clear trauma, but I know at least a few people who feel like that generally, especially post-pandemic. If a prison can turn a regular, functional person to that level of anxiety, you've got to feel sorry for them. My brother is in now, incarcerated in November 2017, and won't get out until 2031 unless a miracle happens. I can't imagine what kind of world he'll be rejoining. I wish there was a feature on Reddit to bring me back to this thread once there were some more answers in a few years. It sounds like a good topic. What happened to Legos? I'm not saying it's bad, I just want to know what happened. Legos lost their patent, leading to the Lego apocalypse, And so to be able to compete with the new companies, they started focusing on more themed kits, making it easy for them to latch on to whatever was popular at the time. I miss when you could just go buy a big box of mixed bricks. My best friend was in jail for a considerable amount of time. He didn't know how to use the new touchscreen washing machines, iPhone, or even the dishwasher. Also, wireless headphones blew his mind. Had to teach him how to call and message people and use apps. He's addicted to social media now, haha. Family member got released after about 5 years. He said the most surprising thing is all the radio stations still play the same music, like only 1/3 of it is new to him. He wasn't in for that long, but it still shines a light on the music industry and radio. A guy I knew who went in the 90s always used to say the biggest difference is white women all of a sudden got big butts. How much shish kebabs have changed? We had some shish kebabs, then we started calling them kebabs. Now it's just babs, so it went from shish kebab to kebab to bab. I wasn't in prison, but enlisted in the military in early 2009 and did most of my training here in the States for that year. So I wasn't completely out of the loop, but after finishing boot camp and training for my job in 2009, I was stationed overseas for 2 years. Upon arrival to my new duty station, I got an iPhone 3GS, but I quickly lost it within a month, and never bothered getting another one. On base, the internet was practically 56K modem speeds, for whatever reason. I think it was due to insufficient infrastructures to provide service to so many people. So my internet usage was limited because of slow speeds and limited free time at work. I remembered Christmas and New Year of 2010, Command didn't approve leave for us to go home, so that we would be ready to deploy if necessary. Everyone ended up getting all boozed up at the barracks, and I mostly spent my time playing PS3 offline because of aforementioned crappy internet. So basically, from 2009 through 2011, during the rise of online video streaming services and smartphones, I missed out on all of that. It wasn't prison or anything, so I was aware, but didn't experience any of it firsthand. Coming back to the States the beginning of 2012 was like traveling a couple of years into the future. Netflix used to arrive by mail, but all of a sudden, the fact that I could access any show I wanted from a single website blew my mind. In the span of the 2 or 3 years, internet speeds increased exponentially for the same cost. It didn't help that I spent the whole time with archaic internet while on base. In 2009, I had a PlayStation Portable for gaming and had to lug around multiple UMDs. Now I can just go to the App Store and download from a plethora of mobile apps on my smartphone, all at 4G speeds. So while it wasn't nearly as drastic as being in prison from the early 2000s until 2018, even those couple of years in the early 2010s where I was away were pretty crazy when I returned. I can only imagine what it'd be like for anyone locked away for 5, 10, or 20 or more years. I bet they wonder why, before they entered prison, people used to say that they graduated from college, and now that they just say graduated college, that would be an unsettling shift. My uncle was incarcerated in '85. Several years ago, we went for a visit and took snacks. The plastic grocery bag blew his mind. My mum was locked up for 10 years starting in the early 2000s. The first time I paused live TV, she lost her frickin' mind. I was actually friends with a guy who was on death row for 20 years. He said it was the cell phones. Who sits for 20 years? And how does he tell you? And where is he now? How does he know about cells? It's actually not unusual at all. The problem is with the death penalty is if you make a mistake and convict an innocent, you've irrevocably screwed up. So those on death row get a lot of appeals. Capital punishment is extremely costly because of the court fees, more costly than not having the death penalty in fact. Not only that, but innocent people occasionally are executed despite the checks in place. I was in prison from 2003 until 2011. Wasn't really surprised by much of anything. Inside, we watched television every day, and the commercials prepared me for the technology. I had the New York Times delivered to my cell or cube daily. We had radios, news, BBC, NPR, etc. Smartphones really weren't that difficult to grasp. I came of age during the early internet era, so smartphones were just mini computers with touchscreens. If anything, technology was more user-friendly than it had been before I went away. You see, it's not the technology that's difficult to adapt to, it's the people. There's a prison culture, and once you adapt to it, you learn to respect and even appreciate it. You see the same people every day, and it's a tense, testosterone-driven environment. Negotiating the unspoken rules means understanding the importance of showing respect without showing fear, and the only way to do that honestly is to get in touch with yourself. to overcome your insecurities, to quiet your righteous anger, to develop a sense of when it's time to move out of the way and when it's time to stand your ground. The culture forces you to become a man among men, coming home to a society of selfish, arrogant, disrespectful, self-assured adult children who glorify their minor struggles on social media and perpetuate this culture of self-identified victimization was, and continues to be, difficult. In prison, not only will you not be celebrated for your so-called courage in aggrandizing your victimization, you'll be mocked for not handling the problem like a man. Out here it seems almost a contest as to who can cry the loudest and blame the most. In my personal life, the same people crying wolf and routinely shifting blame are the ones who dismiss me as a human being because of my prison experience. Ironically, my prison experience is the same reason I dismiss them, and so I feel a chasm has grown between the man I became in prison and the culture I came home to as a 32-year-old adult. And every time I sense someone of relevance in my life dismiss my opinion, subtly condescend to me, gossip about me just out of earshot, etc., I feel that chasm grow. How have your real-life love triangles played out? None of us ended up with any of us, and a whole new set of friends had to be found. Had a thing with a guy, he proceeds to kiss best friend. I forgive them both, they proceed to make out in secret, and got to the point where he asked her to go to bed with him. They cracked and told me again. This had not been the first time something like this had happened with my friend. Needless to say, he no longer had a love interest after that, and I lost a crappy friend, which I guess is a win in the end. I've never understood the whole go after a friend's significant other thing. I once had a former boyfriend's roommate hit on me after we'd broken up, and even that felt weird and off-putting. Oh, I've got one. Dated a guy, really liked him. Maybe was reaching love levels. He then cheats on and dumps me for another girl. Great. Literally the next week, his best friend, who was not at all my type, was messaging me and was reassuring me that my ex told him he would be perfect for me and encouraged him to try to date me. I cut them both out of my life so fast. I had a friend in high school who'd always try to hit on or steal my significant others, even if she didn't like them at all. She just didn't want me getting all the attention. She even did it with new friends. Had a best friend since college who was always hawking on my boyfriends. Then I decided to switch things up and date a woman. She flirted with her too. Then I realized it wasn't just about competing. There was some strange thing she had for me, or against me. I could never figure it out. Anyway, we're not friends anymore, but we are cordial when we see each other. The female competition thing really bums me out. 3 of my friends and I all liked the same girl. They would hit on her. I instead befriended her older and very protective brother. I got the girl. Did he befriend the brother solely to win the girl? No, he's actually a super interesting guy in his own right. A very successful entrepreneur who has worked in the most dangerous countries on Earth, doing absolutely insane crap, i.e. selling helicopters in Brazil or protecting coal ships from pirates. What the frick is that dude's job title? Ron Swanson. Color me pleasantly surprised that he genuinely befriended the guy to be a pal, and not just to use him in a sort of male-dominated medieval family dynamic to get approval to court his sister. I worked offshore. I knew I was going to be gone for a few months. Girlfriend said she wanted to wait since I was such a great guy. I came back and she was the same number of months pregnant that I had been gone. We'd always used protection, so I was skeptical but supportive. She had the kid and it was a different race than either of us. She admitted that while I'd been gone, she had had another boyfriend, then added that she was still seeing him. Acted like it was completely normal, as if it would have been crazy for her to stay alone like she'd offered to. DNA test? Not mine. Nope, the F out. Other guy goes to prison a few months later. Rumor mill says he was a mean-tempered and bullying spouse. She stalked me for decades, called my parents to find me, called my grandparents to find me. I'd see her around town and she would start following me and begging me to give her another chance. I eventually moved 700 miles away. She still calls, unlisted numbers to this day because of her. She gets the number from family or friends. Last I heard, she has 3 kids with 3 dads, never had a job, 2 of the dads in prison. I'm her one that got away. In some ways, I do feel sad for her. She's had a rough life. According to her, I was the only guy who treated her well. If she'd reciprocated, who knows? Our romance was in 1996. I got a message from her on Facebook last month. I didn't reply. Man, if she'd applied half of that drive and persistence into developing stable relationships with a good guy that returned her interest, she'd have a great life right now. Well, I mean, technically, she's trying to do that. My dude dodged a tsunami with that girl. Was dating a guy, he confessed to one of his best friends that he liked her. She rejected him. Was mad because I was second choice, but forgave because frick my life. He still likes her and she messes with him. They fight because she doesn't want me around. They become friends again, I dump him. He admits to never loving me and was in it for the act of a relationship. Now he's all over her and she still plays him. I'm here sad because I loved him. Rest in peace, me. I hope you feel better. I know exactly how it feels to be used. I always wonder what people are thinking when they pull this crap. It will get better, I promise you. Keep on keeping on, friend. Was being manipulated by a guy 7 years older than me. He was gaslighting me and stringing me along. His girlfriend and baby mama knew about me, but stayed with him and blamed me for everything. I eventually cut him off and they got married. She messaged me on Facebook about a year ago, asking if we'd slept together while they were married. I hadn't, and she apologized for putting everything on me. It was unfair for her to do because I was so young, 19 when it started, and he was manipulating me and taking advantage of how naive I was. She explained that she had kicked him out and was beginning divorce proceedings because I wasn't the only one he cheated on her with. And he continued to cheat on her after they were married, including with her next-door neighbor. We ended up talking and laughing over what a scumbag loser he is, and laughing over the fact that we fell for his crap. I recently messaged her to ask how the divorce turned out. It's over, she came out on top, and me and her are friendly now. I was in college and I really liked this college guy in one of my classes. We instantly hit it off and became great friends. I really liked him. I was head over heels and he knew it. He was still hung up on his ex-girlfriend, but we fooled around from time to time. A guy from my high school kept asking me out and I kept turning him down. He wasn't my type, but we remained friends. All of my friends were telling me to give high school guy a chance, but I wanted college guy. I got super sick and texted college guy asking if he could take me to the hospital. He never replied, but I know he read it. So I texted high school guy and he was at my apartment in 10 minutes and even offered to pay my copay because I was flat broke at the time. I did pay him back. After that happened, college guy wouldn't talk to me for a while and like an idiot I kept going after him. I was super heartbroken. High school guy helped me through it. Finally, I decided to give him a shot. Now we're married and about to celebrate our 7-year anniversary with our 3-year-old son. When you say he wasn't your type, what specifically do you mean by that? Seems like he was your type after all. Not the original writer, but I do have a similar story of giving the other guy a chance and it working out. Me and the significant other are going on 5 years. My significant other was not my type. At the time. I figured it out once I started dating him and that what I thought was my type wasn't really my type. Don't knock it until you try it sort of thing. Hey, at least the high school guy's patience paid off. What a truly nice gentleman. All 3 of us now hate each other with the fury of 1,000 suns and wouldn't particularly care if the other 2 died of Lou Gehrig's disease. So not too bad, all things considered. I included the simple summary of a love triangle just because it seems like a concise summary of how the majority of these things have to play out. This is a story of a love square versus a love triangle, but it's pretty crazy. I had been living together with my girlfriend for maybe 6 months, together for maybe a year. She cheated pretty bad, but I don't know the depths of it. But at least 2 guys. She would tell me how much she loves me every 30 seconds, which made me believe that she was loyal. She didn't discuss other men, not as friends or anything, all silence. I'm not the jealous type at all, so I normally just trust and assume it's all good until it isn't. Nobody got caught, she just secretly planned to move in with one of the guys and surprise moved out one day. Not such a great feeling coming into an empty home. Took years to even learn of what transpired. She'd had a tough childhood and always told people the gruesome story of her mum dying at the hands of her father, with specifically her mum's eye dangling from the socket. Fast forward 1.5 years and I'm living with a new girlfriend and I share the eye dangling story and a light bulb goes off in her head. We piece together what happened. When I was living with cheating girlfriend, we had some drama. She'd broken up with me, got with a guy, then came back to me, in addition to other trust-eroding issues, so I was basically not interested in doing the deed with her due to a lack of trust. Cheating girlfriend apparently was sleeping with the boyfriend of what would be my girlfriend in 1.5 years. Boyfriend of future girlfriend says, "Oh hey, I know this girl, she's had a tough life," and tells the whole mum dying story with specifically the dangling eye, which is how we figured it out, and goes on, "She needs a place to stay, can she stay with us?" She's worried her roommate is going to commit the unspeakable act against her. My future girlfriend calls him out that he's cheating with her, since he has a history of cheating and he admits it, so obviously she did not stay with them. Honestly, the cheating I don't mind as much as calling me a roommate and the potential unspeakable act committer when I thought I was in love with this girl, claiming to be my girlfriend and wanting to settle down with me. In conclusion, my girlfriend at the time had an ex-boyfriend that cheated on her with the girl I was seeing who cheated on me. Also, before I'd met my girlfriend at the time, apparently I'd had a dalliance with her childhood best friend. Had no idea. I didn't actually do anything wrong since that predated our relationship, but I still feel like a jerk about it between those two sordid bits of history. My bedroom life included maybe 5 people in a period of 2 years, and 3 of them are all intertwined like this. It's crazy. Kinda related, but my Aunt Janet was cheated on by my Uncle John with a girl Kate. Kate was cheating with John on her husband Brandon. Now Kate and John are getting married, and Janet and Brandon are getting married. Basically, they switched partners. All fake names, of course. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was on a work contract on location. I met a guy, started dating, and things were good. One day, he told me his ex was going to be in town for a day and then they were going to hang out. That night, we were supposed to meet for drinks at the pub, and he was super distant and acting strange. It was obvious to me that he'd hooked up with her. He ended up leaving early to go to bed, alone. I was teed off. There was another guy also working for the company who'd always flirted with me. I happened to literally run into him as I'm headed outside to the balcony. Maybe it was something I was giving off, but he grabbed me and kissed me, and I went with it, and we ended up hooking up that night on the balcony, which also happened to be the place me and the first guy hooked up the first time. The next day, Guy 1 confesses that he hooked up with his ex. I told him I could tell and kind of left it at that. We just started hanging out less, and I started seeing a lot more of Guy 2. One day, it was quite apparent that they both weren't talking to me. They had talked. I rode up the elevator with one of their co-workers one day who told me that they were both upset that I'd hooked up with both of them in the same location, which frankly, I still think is silly. They ended up making friends, but I was out of the picture. Last week of my contract rolls around, and one particular party night, Guy 1 is giving me a lot of attention. Guy 2 also sees this going on. I end up leaving with Guy 1. At my place, the phone rings, and it's Guy 2, and he asks to speak to Guy 1. They're both from the same country, so they end up having some long drawn-out conversation that I don't understand. 10 minutes later, there's a knock on the door. It's Guy 2. He asks to come in. I let him, and they both proceed to start kissing me and removing my clothes. That was a good night. Not so much a love triangle as a love V, but here's how it went. I liked this girl. This girl had a boyfriend, but was bi-curious and into me. She asked her boyfriend if experimenting with me was okay. He said it was okay so long as he was involved too. Me being 21 and having a bad case of the feelings, I agreed to this. It lasted maybe a month and it was really awkward. It ended up with me breaking up with them, but those two staying together. After that, I decided I'm not into guys at all and I would rather not repeat that experience. I don't talk to that pair much anymore, but I think they're married now. Yeah, I think most of the love triangles in my life that I've run into could be described as love Vs, i.e. one sad loser on the side has a crush on one of the parties. Luckily, there are a couple of true love triangles to help us fulfill the question in this video's heading. A few years back, I had hernia surgery and was on bed rest for a few days. One night, out of nowhere, an old fling hit me up telling me she was in the neighborhood. I was ecstatic at hearing her voice because she was one of the most beautiful, intelligent, and successful people I knew, and I always admired her. She ended up coming over and taking care of me, and we hit it off way better than before. I didn't know it at the time, but she was dating this guy since forever and was even living with him. When I found out, I told her I was going to be seeing other people too. We still ended up seeing each other for a few months, and eventually she had to tell him that she had cheated on him with me. He wanted her to stay even after we spent a weekend at my cabin. She stayed with the other guy because he was a safe option and she needed a place to stay. I couldn't promise her anything because I felt like I couldn't trust her and she didn't like the fact that I was dating other people. In reality, we were in a relationship and I saw other people as a way to not think about her living with her boyfriend. The whole thing was a crappy situation because we were madly in love with each other, but because of our trust issues, we ended up breaking it off. I ended up in a relationship with someone else for like a month. We never really talked since then. She married that guy a few months after I married my wife. She still calls at night from time to time, but I never answer because I'm happily married and I don't need that kind of trouble in my life. Don't want to be intrusive, but no other way to ask. Does your wife know? How does she feel about this? No, I never really considered it worth mentioning. Prefer to let sleeping dogs lie. Ha, wise move. Was a few years ago, and I'm currently still with one of them. My ex-boyfriend was manipulative and an emotional bully, not to mention pushed me into physical things that I didn't want to do. His influence caused me to begin working at Olive Garden while during my sophomore year at college, which led to the entrance of my current significant other. My ex was cheating with multiple girls via text over a period of months. Each time I confronted him resulted in a tearful plea of, "I'll change, I love you so much, I can't bear hurting you," after it occurred. After half a year of this, I'd virtually numbed myself to his pleas, but was too afraid of what I'd lost, my virginity, to give up the relationship. Instead, I acted as his transportation since his parents were unreliable and he was trying to finish his high school diploma. He was 1.5 years younger than me, so at Olive Garden, I never expected to find anyone else because of the restaurant environment and was not actually looking for anyone else. My ex also joined working there after quitting a nearby restaurant. He was absolutely crap at his job as a host, often infuriating the managers with his stupidity and lack of common sense. Eventually, I noticed another guy who I called a better and more mature version of the ex, but I was not planning on leaving at that time. My current significant other was sarcastic, aloof from everyone else, and mysterious, which of course attracted me, but I still had some attachment to the ex because I was fiercely loyal to a fault. I regret how I handled the falling out and transition to my current significant other because I did not cut off the ex like most people would have, and how I know I should have. Slowly, I developed an admiration for my SO and felt butterflies in my stomach whenever he was near. It was not a linear upward progression in our initial stages of relationship because even though he hated my ex, he respected the boundaries of a relationship. This changed, however, when he began to realize I was interested in him, and he felt as though he might rescue me from this jerk. I too looked at him as a rescuer. The ex began to notice his attention in me and that his presence was often near me, causing him to purposefully be a butt by leaving dirty dishes on my significant other's table, making inflammatory comments to him, and entering the area whenever he saw SO and I near each other. This became a sort of tango around the restaurant. I knew the ex became agitated by seeing me near my SO, so I would increasingly be around him and then disappear when the ex came into the area. I would still drive him places, but when he prompted me to confirm he and I were in a relationship, I would deflect and never answer straightly. One lonely night, I was texting my SO and he invited me to his apartment to watch a Quentin Tarantino movie. I gladly went and watched the movie with him, but nothing else happened because he was not the type to push, and I had been extremely damaged by the ex's advances to the point where I would later tremble just laying in the same bed as my SO, as a result of my ex. Our texting grew more frequent while I became more dismissive and numb toward the ex. I feared for my SO's safety because my ex is genuinely psychopathic and seemed to blame him for taking me away from him. One night driving my ex home, I knew I had to end it. He was sobbing and wanted me to hold him, but I couldn't stand touching him as I knew it was over. I had to carefully word my sentences so that he would finally leave my damn car. Then one night I found out the ex was stalking my SO. He had followed him to the apartment, which scared me to death knowing he was immature and prone to reactivity. Shortly after, as I left the SO's apartment to go home and had stopped off at a Wendy's drive-thru, my ex pulled up in his truck next to me and rolled down the window, grinning. He then pulled out a military-style knife and informed me it was just in case something happened. This was too close to comfort for me, so I texted his father to let him know what his son had done, causing the ex to be infuriated with me. However, I knew his father would not let that situation happen again. Since then, I've received lovelorn letters about how much I was still thought of, and that even when we are old and grey, he'll still love me. He attempted quite recently to make a friendship pact with my SO to have limited access to me, which he rationally declined. It's been a month since the ex last sent a message over social media that he was moving on and wished me the best. However, I intrinsically know this claim to be false and expect the day when he makes contact again. I don't think I'll ever be rid of him, honestly, unless he falls deeply in love with someone else to where the obsession falls on her. My conclusion of being in a love triangle for a short time was that I was confused, hurt, lonely, and looking for someone to rescue me. But I regret that it happened in a way where I could label it as a love triangle because it was unfair to both parties. I won't deny it's exciting to have two people dance with each other for your affections, but it isn't by any means healthy and at least one of the people will be hurt. After me basically being a butthole for a bit and stringing them both along while I tried to make up my mind, I stopped dating both of them and stayed single for about a year to get my crap together. I think generally if you're caught in a love triangle and don't know who to choose, that's a sign that neither of them is right for you. That is strangely down to earth for a person who was evidently involved in a situation that sounds like it was pretty unhealthy for a while. Good on you for changing, and I hope you keep it up. Married a gay guy. We were non-monogamous. I got really close to a friend with benefits, and now we're a 3. Took a hot mess and nearly 2 years of drama, but we are a functioning poly-triad. We definitely had our moments, but we're still here now, so we do live together and usually share a bed. They can both be complete punks about space and covers, and only one of us actually likes sleeping in the middle, so I occasionally take a break for a night or two. We're not actually non-monogamous, read open. Obviously, I do the deed with more than one person, 2 in fact, but that's just mostly been a crap ton of life stuff going on, including a big move, so that side of our lives has just been sort of on hold. Mine was like some kind of freak love square. 2 guys wanted to date me, and I wanted to date a guy who didn't give a crap about me unless it involved dancing. I gave up on chasing the dancer. I dated one of the guys who originally wanted to date me. It ended badly. I decided to date the other guy who seemed interested. We got married and are expecting a baby now. We were pretty good friends. She wasn't sure if she was into girls and wanted to experiment with someone she trusted. He and I had been dating on and off for 3 years, together for a full year at the time. We'd had a couple of three-ways, and after a couple of drunken kisses between me and her, we suggested she join us. We worked well together for 6 months, dating each other equally. I was 3 years older than her, and people said we looked alike. Then she got a haircut and a dye job, and she suddenly looked like my little sister. It was not something I was into at all. But he was, and she was. And I pulled back a little, and then it was me versus her, and he chose her. And then dumped her because he wanted her little sister. Her actual flesh and blood little sister. In conclusion, he chose her, she was the younger one, he left her because he was into her little sister. It made me less bitter. He asked her to marry him at my birthday dinner. She said yes, I got drunk, he drove me home. Our D&D group survived the event, and I was a bridesmaid. That's a crap move on his part. I'd been with my ex for 2 years, treated her like the princess that she wanted to be, gave her unconditional trust, which I have now learned was a mistake. She had terrible social skills, so I encouraged her to make guy friends as she doesn't have any. Tried to get her back in contact with one of her long-lost friends from teenage years and encouraged them to spend time together, and I even spent time and got to know the guy to show my girl I have her interests in mind. She ends up doing the deed with him and telling me that they share a pure form of love, something she never had for me. Cried, been depressed, and felt like a worthless piece of crap because no matter what I did, it seems like I don't deserve to be loved. Forgave her, tried to win her back, and gave her patience and time while hiding how much this is killing me inside because she feels guilty to see me like this. End up figuring out she was just a spoiled, selfish brat because she will not stop lying to me and kept seeing him, and he is a manipulative and controlling substance addict, and they both never had a real relationship and told me that they developed true love within a couple of weeks of doing the deed with each other. It still hurts me like heck to think about this, but I really did everything that I could. It didn't end up good for me, fricked me up mentally as I have depression, 0 out of 10 would not recommend. Older generations. Who are the "I don't use computers" people of your time? My grandparents are very old-fashioned even for their generation, if it counts. My grandfather worked as a grocery manager for years. He finally quit when his small mum-and-pup store buckled down on bar scans and electronic cash registers. He was convinced that barcodes were going to be the mark of the beast from Revelations, and that if people use computers to access adult content, then all computerized items must be banned. So there's that. When remote control TVs came out, I suggested that my father buy one, and he said, "It will be a cold day in hell when I'm too lazy to tell one of you boys to get up and change the channel for me." It was such an amazing sentence that I committed it to memory, and I still remember it word for word 50 years later. From his point of view, he already had a remote control TV. Why should he pay extra to have it automated? Exactly. He would have had us act out Game of Thrones before getting a subscription to HBO. My mom was just telling me about when answering machines were new and how people were so fearful of them and refused to leave a message. She got promoted at a job because she didn't mind calling clients and leaving messages. I bought my grandmother an answering machine in 2005. She refused to get one before that, despite several of her children begging her to invest in one. I got her a $10 one from Walmart. I told her that I'd set it up for her, and she asked me where it was. She was under the impression that answering machines were about the size of a toaster oven. After some questions, I also learned that she objected to getting one for so long because she was concerned about how much counter space she thought it would take up. But she also used the same bathwater for a week at the time and kept her hearing aid batteries, all of them, not just the ones she wasn't currently using, in the freezer so they would last longer. So who knows? Some of the older alkaline batteries would slowly discharge over time. You could slow them down by storing the ones you weren't using in the freezer. It didn't make them last a lot longer, but it did give a slightly longer shelf life. However, my grandmother would keep all of her batteries in the freezer and not have any batteries in her hearing aids at all. As you can guess, that didn't improve her hearing, no matter how long the batteries were lasting in the freezer. I mean, I might be wrong. That sounds like it might stray from being technologically illiterate and just not caring that much about functioning in life in general. The battery freezer thing might be an incredible case of being a cheapskate. Some still had outdoor toilets and were laughing at those who'd installed them inside because they're crapping in their own houses? I lived on a homestead a little while. I had an outdoor pit privy toilet. I hand-carved the toilet seat myself. Sometimes I miss watching the sunset while taking a dump. It was way better than being stuck in a small room reading Reddit on my phone. Unless it was raining, wiping while holding an umbrella is trickier than it looks. When I was a kid, late 50s and early 60s, seatbelts in the cars were an option. Lots of people thought they were unnecessary and refused to pay extra for them. Heaters and windshield defoggers were likewise optional. My parents bought a new 1964 Plymouth Valiant and didn't get the option. I think all it takes is one snowfall in the winter when you're struggling with a windshield that constantly fogs up and frosts over. Absolute misery pulling over and scraping the inside of your windshield. My dad once told me a story about his grandmother refusing to fly in planes because she didn't want to get her hair all messed up from the wind. I'm picturing her flying with Red Baron Snoopy as the pilot. "Honey, I promise your hair won't get messed up from the wind." Plops leather bomber hat on her head. My 89-year-old mum pays for cable but insists on watching only PBS and occasionally NBC, CBS or ABC. The other channels are too much technology to find on the remote. She also buys multiple boxes or cans of food, dates them in Sharpie marker, records the price, less coupon or sale special, and has a rack for all her finds. She will never eat all the oatmeal or beans in our collective lifetimes. But she was a Depression-era child, so I get why the urge to stock up on food is strong. My grandmother is 89. When she was a kid, she had an uncle who hated cars. He called them machines and refused to drive one. It could have been job security though, her whole family worked for the railroad. In all fairness, cars are machines. Then again, so are trains. Fun fact, the Russian word for car is machina. My dad is 65. He remembers old folks complaining about the forward pass in football. But it did completely change the game. My grandaunt still believes that 15 is the age of adulthood, that schooling isn't necessary beyond that point. She grew up in a time when literacy wasn't a given. With a bachelor's degree and a very mediocre Spanish, I would have killed it in 1920. For all of about 8 years. Well, now I'm greatly depressed. My grandmother drinks only hot decaf coffee. Breakfast, hot decaf coffee. Dinner, hot decaf coffee. Feeling parched after a day of hard work? Hot decaf coffee. 100-degree July day with lung-clogging humidity? Hot decaf coffee. When I was growing up, we never had ice. That was a luxury. Cold drinks aren't good for your stomach. My parents are from former Soviet country and also refuse to drink anything cold, saying it'll make you sick. My dad doesn't even drink beer cold. Room temperature at most. Any beer-drinking alcoholic will tell you can drink a lot more beers if your beers are room temperature instead of cold. This is actually a very common thing in Asia. In China, they only drink hot water. According to Chinese medicine, cold water, and cold things in general, are very bad for your stomach. They won't eat refrigerated fruit. I lived in China for a few years and my roommate thought I was insane for refrigerating my watermelon. I found that was the safest way to store it because none of them would touch it. In Germany, they don't put ice in their water. I've never liked ice in my water, so living in both Germany and China at different points in my life worked for me. The US is actually pretty unique in that everyone wants their beverages ice cold. I had a Chinese roommate in college who kept a gallon of Sunny D out at room temperature for weeks while drinking it. Weirded me out. My grandparents laughed at the idea of a mobile phone, or sending messages through the phone line when fax machines were a thing. My grandparents didn't like computers and they still had a typewriter or wrote by hand. I was given a typewriter as a kid, but then I was using Windows 95. OG hipster right there. I'll be honest, as a 30-something-year-old, I have no idea what a fax actually is. The gosh darn answer would be one Google search away, but I'm going to live on in ignorance for a few more minutes, so you lot can judge whether this is normal or whether I'm exceptionally ignorant. Back in the 80s, I knew an old lady who used one of those really old toasters that could only toast one side of the bread at a time. As a present, we went out and bought her a modern pop-up toaster, but she wouldn't use it. She preferred to use her old one. I could see if she had one of those rad Sunbeam Radiant toasters, which in many ways are superior to any toaster on the market today, but this is just a fire waiting to happen. I see you've also watched that Technology Connections video. I'm the web designer for a local organization. Their treasurer refuses to accept card payment via their website. People have to print out forms, fill them out, and post them with a check. I also get paid by check with a handwritten note. They would be a much more popular and successful business if they just modernized a little. My law firm still uses checks. We're also on QuickBooks Desktop 2008, and our timekeeping software is from 2011. We don't use Word, we use WordPerfect, and our forms are still set up to double space after periods. Nightmarish. My grandmother didn't like to use the remote control for her television because she was afraid it would break somehow and function as a laser dangerous enough to set things on fire. My grandmother complained about remote controls for TVs because it would promote people being lazy. Because apparently watching TV in the first place is a rigorous activity. Modern day. I've had people tell me using a voice-activated light system in my house is lazy because there's something to be said for getting up and turning on a light. Like what? It builds character to flip a switch? I'll take my space house, thanks. My Depression-era parents refused to ever have AC because it seemed frivolous and unnecessary, and my dad chose seatbelts as the symbol of government overreach and refused to ever wear one. In 1980, we took a family trip from Virginia to St. Louis and back with 4 kids in the bed of a pickup truck. I remember my grandma telling stories of when AC was a new feature in cars. People would keep their windows rolled up in summer so that people in other cars would think they had AC. My parents didn't have AC. I begged for it constantly, and every time my mum would send me outside for a few minutes instead. That way it would seem cooler inside by comparison. If it didn't, she'd tell me that I could go up into the attic and come back down. They bought an AC unit the year after I graduated and moved out. They just didn't want me to be comfortable, I guess. Being miserable builds character, or something. My senior year of high school, I had a series of newspaper articles in the local paper explaining how the web wasn't a fad and wasn't going away. Nobody but one guy at the paper believed it. It was 1995. My high school, I graduated in 2000, was like this. We didn't have computers in high school, and although there was pressure to buy them, the administration claimed computers were a dying fad, and spent the money that was to go for a computer lab on new football equipment instead. This was rural Pennsylvania, and I assure you, I'm not making this up. Others did bring up a good point and stated this is a tactic for administration to spend how they want versus what the school needs. Also, according to people who still live there whose kids now go to school there, the school did a 180 on technology in the early 2000s, and kids now have computer classes. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a professor in college that taught building systems. He was like 80 years old, knew all of the new ways to build a structure. Never used CAD. All of his details and plans were hand-drawn. I've taught a couple of classes on how to use more advanced functions in CAD. None of my students had ever even seen a French curve before. I was purposely taught how to hand-draft in high school, 2007, before I learned CAD. My grandfather used to yell about, "You lazy kids and your zippers!" My father worked at a car dealership up until 2018, was a manager and had a computer on his desk. Someone filed a claim that he had harassed them, saying he sent lewd emails. IT came to his desk and logged onto his computer. Not only had he never sent an email, he had never read one either. He had more than 60,000 unread emails. His boss asked him how he knew about meetings if he never checked his email. It's not hard. You see everyone get up and walking to a location, you follow. Needless to say, he was cleared and the person making false claims was fired. Color TV. When they became common in the mid-60s, a lot of older people believed they emitted harmful rays. When Mum finally got one in circa 1972, it was kept in her bedroom and we were ushered in to watch it only on special occasions, and we had to sit at least 10 feet away. Given how small and low resolution even a big TV was in 1972, I can't help but laugh at the crowded family squinting to work out what was happening from across the room. My grandmother is 97 and told me about people who would refuse to get air conditioning or drink sodas because they're the devil's work. She grew up on a farm in a 2-room house with 11 family members living in that house. She always had sodas and the AC rocking and rolling all summer. My grandma is 79 and refuses to turn on her AC for religious and "it's gonna make mold grow everywhere" reasons. I swear she's gonna die of heat stroke one summer, but welp, she's into some kind of hardcore sub-Christian or Catholic cult. It's not Amish, Mormon, or the Jehovah's Witnesses, too minor so I forgot the name. Tech is not forbidden per se in their thing, but it's not liked at all by their thing. It's like everything bad that's happening to Canada comes from soulless new tech and immigrants. The whole thing is weird and doesn't make sense to atheist software engineering students like me, so I'd have trouble explaining more. My mother refuses to get a smartphone. She does, however, have a tablet with a data plan she takes with her everywhere, in addition to her dumb phone. When I point out that tablets are just big smartphones, she scoffs. What can you do? I don't read novels. My grandfather thought they were a plot by the elites to both ruin our eyesight and keep us locked away in a fantasy world. How old are you that the technological advancement your grandfather didn't trust was books? Socrates has joined the chat. Scrolls were good enough for my parents and their parents before them. Socrates didn't even really like scrolls either. Since your writings don't update as you learn more or change your mind, he thought that they would just spread misinformation and it was better to rely on talking. Love you, Socrates, but writing is the invention that allows for a large society to function. What Socrates needed was GitHub, to be honest. I said at one time I would never buy CDs. I liked albums and tapes too much. I never got rid of the albums and tapes, but now I have many CDs also. When they first became available, I honestly felt that both CDs and DVDs were just an industry conspiracy to stop people from recording their own music or movies with cassettes or VHS. DVDs were originally marketed as uncrackable or uncopyable, so you're not entirely wrong. I remember it being a huge deal when that guy found out how to do it and shared that info to the world. My grandpa used to tell me that he was basically set for life because he learned to read and write. Mass illiteracy wasn't as long ago as we like to think. Touch-tone dialing. My mum refused to pay the $1 and change a month to have it. She finally caved in around 2002. Since several have asked, touch-tone was a keypad, much like what almost every phone is now. Before that, it was a rotary dial phone. When my dad was in his 80s and losing some of his marbles, I started taking over some of his household chores and errands. Discovered that he was still using a rotary phone because he wasn't paying for touch-tone. He was, however, still paying a rental fee for his telephone. He had been renting it for 50 years. We went to the phone store and got him a touch-tone and they waived the fee, so that his bill pretty much remained the same with the new phone. I also got him a cordless, but he hated using it. He'd forget how to answer it. Press talk. Poke? It was sad to watch a formerly bright person, former high school teacher, totally unable to cope with simple household items. I still miss him. Digital clocks are lazy. My school has to hold an assembly for the 5th graders every year who can't read analog clocks because they can't afford to replace all the clocks in the middle and high school buildings. As silly as this is, I think that analog clocks will always be around. As a nearsighted person, I can often read an analog when my eyes can't see a digital one. Grandfather thought graduating high school was a big deal. He graduated in 1941 and was the first in his family. We had a great aunt who hated using the washing machine and claimed it never cleaned the sheets properly. At least in Costa Rica, where I live, at that time it was all you needed. Once you ended high school, you were pretty much set up for life. Some of my grunkles married shortly after finishing it and are still happily married. Boy, that's a different time. To think it was normal for people about my age to have been married and stable for half their lives, when a lot of my counterparts right now don't own houses, is just kind of wild. My grandparents were the first people to have a television in their neck of the woods, rural North Carolina in the 1950s. A big deal back then. Grandma told a story when riding on a bus back from work one day and a couple of her neighbors were on there too. They were talking about how the Blake Burners got one of them fancy TVs, saying how it was an evil thing and would simply be bad of one of them to buy one, and that they, the neighbors, were wise enough to never get one. Of course, they knew my grandmother was on the bus with them, as they said it really loud so she would hear them. Petty jealousy from them made my grandma run off the bus in tears. Story goes that Grandpa, a mechanic who was doing well enough that they could buy a TV, was so livid that he refused to work on those neighbors' vehicles for decades. He was the only mechanic around for almost 20 miles, which back then was an hour drive from anywhere else. An acquaintance of mine told me her grandmother doesn't own a refrigerator because refrigerators are harmful and for lazy people that don't want to cook fresh food. I remember people's parents not having microwaves, although by the time I was growing up that was pretty rare. The convenience had won over almost everyone by then. I've had a coworker about 52 years old, refused to use a computer because he caught his wife having an affair on a chat room on their computer, so he destroyed it. At that point, if she wants to cheat, she'll find another way. Yeah, she was cheating. The computer is how he found out, right? I still have a wall phone in my kitchen. A young woman at my workplace asked me in all innocence if I sell my house, will the new owners be forced to have a landline too? My grandfather refused to get a VCR, but not because he was a Luddite. VCRs were all made in Japan, and he'd fought in the Pacific in World War II, so he refused to buy anything Japanese. Interesting side fact, this is why Nissan originally started selling cars as Datsun. They figured there was going to be a lot of bitter vets who remembered Nissan making war materials. Did Volkswagen ever have the same problem? They did for a bit. The brand got passed around a bunch before they started production. It was even going to be given to Ford for free, and they declined. It was offered to a bunch of different English companies. They all declined. So it was given back to Germany under supervision. It might have helped that they didn't actually make that many before all the factories started churning out war stuff. Seriously, the very first assembly plant opened in 38 and the war started in 39. Not a ton of time spent making bugs. They only made 210 before shutting down. Civilian bugs only started happening in the late 40s and only boomed in popularity in the mid-60s-ish. 20 years after the war ended, and during an entirely different war, so I imagine for some, it was easy to ignore the German aspect. Rural areas are always fun for this. In a grocery store, I overheard an older couple, back in 1989, discussing their high cholesterol levels. They didn't trust doctors and said downing a cup of really hot coffee every morning would clear the obstructions. No need for fancy medicine. I'm 65. Back in the early 1980s, I remember my grandmother asking my dad if they still made cars with the levers, throttle and spark advance, up by the steering wheel. The last car she had driven was a Model T Ford in about 1930. My grandma refused to get a TV in the early 1950s. My dad always wanted to watch shows, but he had to sneak to his friend's house because she didn't believe in getting a TV. My grandfather was a Mennonite, but had moved to a city and was working in factories as an adult. He even used to watch TV until John Wayne died, then he got rid of their set. He said it was evil to watch dead people moving around on a screen as if alive, like watching ghosts. He would tell us that TV was the devil's work. As a kid, I started drawing cartoon characters like animal characters and stuff. One day, he asked to see my drawings and he was outraged, saying I was drawing the product of bestiality, said it was evil. All that said, I loved him, and as I got older, he and I got really close. He was a God-fearing man, but he was also a very humble, peaceful, and funny guy. He taught me woodworking, gardening, and the joy of just sitting quietly in nature. He was just trying to save you from becoming a furry. My grandpa had to fight a hard campaign to get his dad and grandpa to switch from farming with horses to farming with tractors. His grandpa continued to maintain the horses for his own garden until his death in the 1960s. What's the dumbest thing you've seen someone do to their vehicle? My old mechanic had a guy come in with a Ford Probe. He claimed it was low on oil. They take the dipstick out and the whole stick has oil on it. He checks again with the same result. The guy took the oil cap off and looked down into the hole and said, "See, it is low." He had put 3 to 4 cases of oil into the motor trying to fill the entire block up. The previous mechanic didn't know how to patch an exhaust leak and had tried to weld a Rockstar can around the leak. The leak caused the second oxygen bank to fail, which is why they tried to patch it with the can. Not a week later, the bank read a failure again. You don't weld it on, you use some sealant and a couple of Jubilee clips. How the heck do you even weld an aluminium can? Was he using TIG? This definitely won't be the worst one in this thread. I used to know a 30-year-old who would put the car air freshener duct-taped outside the exhaust, kinda just dangling in front of the opening. His logic was that it would make the exhaust smell better for pedestrians. That is oddly sweet, which was also the fragrance he was going for. Had a customer once who had their oil light come on and couldn't figure out how to top up the oil. He thought it might have worked like his boat motor, so he poured a jug of oil into his fuel tank. What would that do to a car? Fiery, dramatic explosion, or just engine damage? Assuming enough oil was added that it won't even start, but it was cranked a lot, possibly not damage the engine, but a lot of work to fix it. Drop gas tank, dump and clean. Clean fuel tank sending unit, replace filters. Flush fuel lines. Remove fuel rail, clean injectors and the rail. Clean intake manifold, pull heads, clean heads and plugs and valve train. Possibly pull exhaust manifold and clean that if any oil got through to there. I'm honestly not sure if it would even get past the injectors though. Depends on how much he added and how well mixed it was. There might be a couple of sensors to replace as well. Expensive, time-consuming, but I don't think it would do anything fatal to the car. I wrench on bikes, not cars, and at least once a month we have someone come in that put chain lube or grease on their brake rotors because they were squealing, and now they want to know why their brakes aren't grabbing. Oh my god, I love this so much. I'm a cyclist and a moron, but somehow I have never managed to plumb these depths of stupidity. And the sad part is that I'm all but certain someone must have done this to their car as well. I was working at a performance shop at the time, 2010. Golf GTI comes in for lack of power and throwing check engine codes for underboost and several for fuel trim management conditions. Did the typical process of checking the turbo wastegate operation, pressure and smoke tested the charged side of the turbo system for leaks, tested fuel pressures, all checked out. Removed the intake side from the turbo to inspect for rips in the rubber boot, all good. Looked inside the intake boot and this moron bought one of those turbinator gimmicky things and put it inside the intake. It had turned completely on its side and was restricting 80% of the airflow. Removed the obstruction and motor operating values returned to normal and power was restored. Didn't feel any guilt that this idiot had to pay a few hundred for me to diagnose and remove his awesome DIY performance mod. Not a mechanic, but former service writer. Woman comes in for an oil change, some common minivan, nothing out of the ordinary. Walked by the van while it was up on the rack and noticed one of the tires was nearly bald in the middle, cords showing. Textbook overinflation. I checked the tire pressure, was well overinflated. Then looked around the vehicle, 2 more tires were in exactly the same state, overinflated and showing damage from it. The 4th was a bit underinflated, no glaringly obvious tread wear. Pointed it out to the customer when she came back and asked if there's a reason 3 tires would be overinflated. Long story short, she was occasionally seeing a low tire light on the dash, no indication of which tire, just low tire, told her husband and he just aired up all 4 tires. Happened again and fixed the same way, rinse and repeat. So over time they kept the tire with the leak going but managed to ruin the other 3. Buy a tire pressure gauge if your car doesn't give you a per tire pressure reading. Completely fill their engine with oil and wonder why it's smoking and then locked up. Or put oil in the fuel tank because that's what they did on their lawnmower. My mom filled the oil with water when the car was overheating. She said that she knew it said oil, but she didn't know where else to put the water. She was just making some mayonnaise. Oh, the list is long. Removing PCV hose, assorted vacuum lines, O2 sensor, thinking that they're going to get better performance, cutting a wire under the dash to hook up a stereo, then bringing the car to me to fix the taillights, pouring 3 quarts of oil in but the dipstick still shows low because they put the oil in the radiator, putting gasoline in a diesel truck, again. That again just tops it all off. You think people would learn, but sometimes not, and those stories can make the best jokes. Did a co-op at a shop back in high school. Guy complains about how his car doesn't sit straight. We pull it in and don't even need to put it on the lift to realize that he has 17-inch rims on one side and 15s on the other. Took me about 45 minutes of explaining to him why cars aren't made like that before he told us that he'd be taking his business elsewhere. On a side note, the side with the 15s were like 100% bald, like racing slick bald, and everything in that car was falling to pieces. I have too many stories of crap I found in people's cars there, but this one has to be my favorite. Wait, he knew it was that way and he thought it was fine? What? I need to know more. Pretty much, he thought that it just had to roll. Honestly, I probably could have put shopping cart wheels on and he wouldn't have given much of a crap. Bit of a stretch, but you know what I mean. I bought my car off a guy for $785. For all intents and purposes, it worked fine, but the guy said it overheated almost daily. 99 Nissan Sentra, manual, 135,000 miles. If it didn't overheat, it would have been closer to 3 or 4 grand, maybe even more. I bought it anyways because I could try fixing it and because I was desperate for a car. My old one died and I lived 10 miles from work. So I brought the car home, the guy filled the radiator per an agreement we made, and the overflow tank was already empty. I started feeling along the coolant piping, and when it came to the thermostat sensor housing, I could stick my fingernail inside the gap. My fingers came out soaking wet with coolant. Went to a parts store, spent $10 on a housing gasket, $3 on some liquid gasket, and $50 on new oil, a new oil filter, a new air filter, radiator cleaner, and coolant. Spent an entire day putting that gasket in. The reason it took so long is a fricking story and a half. That was all about Murphy's Law. Changed the oil, cleaned out the radiator, and I haven't had any trouble since. All in all, a perfectly working car for about $850. I kind of feel bad for the guy who sold it to me. I brought a diesel Mercedes for $250 because the timing chain snapped. I bought it for parts, but it was a nicer car than what I had, so we were going to do an engine swap. Then I noticed the timing chain hadn't snapped, the belt tensioner had failed, and the timing chain cover had failed. Replaced the cover with one a friend had, got the car on the road for the price of an oil change. Maybe fork out for a mechanic's visit before you chuck your vehicles on eBay, people. If there's an easy fix, you could at least make another few hundred off the sale. Worked as a car cleaner at a dealership one summer in high school. Guy towed in a relatively new, top-of-the-line Corvette he had bought there sometime before I started. He was teed off that it had died on the road and had been running like crap before that, ranting and raving about how he spent all his money and it only went X months or years before completely breaking down. One of my work buddies got up on a lift and started looking it over. He opens the oil drain plug and nothing comes out. He pulls apart the engine and the oil could now be described best as glue. Owner talks to the guy and asks when was the last time he changed the oil. The guy had zero idea what he was talking about. He had no idea you had to do that. He assumed that you just added gas and that's the only thing you need to do. The engine was a complete loss, which meant that the car was a complete loss to him. If there's one thing I can take away from all these stories, it's that it's pretty astonishing how many people don't know or care to get their oil changed. I have a story for this. Some years ago, here where I live, there was a fairly widespread craze of mixing oil. I don't remember the type, but it wasn't at all related with the engine, like sunflower oil or something like that, with diesel, for better fuel consumption. The thought was that this kind of oil would burn anyway, and mixed with diesel it would give the same kilometers for less money. Of course, it wasn't the brightest of ideas, so I remember that despite being fairly young, I remember strongly advising against this practice. My mother didn't listen to me, then proceeded to top her Mitsubishi Pajero Turbo, great car for fuel economy, I know, with whatever oil she used. Now to be fair, the car held up pretty well despite the abuse, which is because it was a tank. However, it eventually succumbed. If I remember correctly, the fuel pump completely failed and had to be replaced entirely, but I might be forgetting stuff. The funny thing is, though, that the mechanic, after looking at the engine for about 3 minutes or something like that, asked almost angrily to my mother if she was using the oil. When questioned how he knew that, he said something along the lines of, "It's the fourth this week that comes in with this issue." Had a guy show up at a tire shop bragging about being blackout drunk and needing his tire changed. He had his spare on with 3 out of 5 lug nuts. He had tightened them by hand and they backed off. Had to replace all of the studs. Folk would come in asking for tire repairs or patches on tires that were literally cut in half. Like you drove on the rim for a week split down the middle in half. They'd get so offended when I explained that they not only needed a tire, but now a rim as well. I've seen a fake intercooler on a Sunfire, paper mache used instead of a Bondo, the list goes on. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a guy bring in his motor-swapped late 80s F-150 for some transmission work. These came factory with either a 300 straight 6, 351 V8 or 460 V8. He put 2.3-litre carbureted 4-cylinder out of an old Ranger in it. The reason behind the swap was that it would improve the fuel mileage at the cost of some speed. That thing could barely move under its own power. If you floored it, it would top out at about 55 miles per hour, wide open, and take a good minute or two to get there. Not a car mechanic, but I know a guy who used self-tapping screws to fasten a roof rack to his car. A few people have asked if it worked. Yes, but it leaked. I would not recommend it though, because the roof sheet metal probably doesn't have much load-bearing integrity. He must have run out of duct tape. Or crazy glue. Not a mechanic, but a car enthusiast. Saw a couple of cars where owners didn't know what basic maintenance was. Like no oil change, no brake pad change, the oil turned into jelly and you had to scrape it out. The most ridiculous thing were the brakes. My mechanic friend showed me the brakes of an elderly lady's car. The brake discs were gone, like almost completely wiped down to 5 or 6 millimeters. She said to him, "The car feels weird while I brake." If that sweet little old lady wants to drive around like that, nothing's going to stop her. I don't know, a brick wall probably would. A lady stated that her car said low coolant, so she filled up the coolant. She made it about a mile and the car started running terrible and cut off. Shop rollback picked it up. She filled up the coolant by removing the oil cap and topping the motor off with water. Let me tell you about Diamond Plate Guy and Focus Bro. Diamond Plate Guy had 2 things he used to modify his truck: a drill and a ton of diamond plate. It was an absolute base model V6 Ram 1500 with the exhaust chopped off, which I thought was bad enough until I opened the hood. He had drilled or glued diamond plate to every surface, air filter box, intake manifold, fan shroud, etc. This was 18 months ago. My eyes still haven't recovered, but this isn't the end. He had some crappy wheels that he'd painted white himself. I know this because he painted the inside of the wheel where it seats to the hub, which caused them to seize to said hubs. I literally had to buy a bigger hammer to smack them off. The Focus Bro, the guy had a custom straight pipe with full Sparco race seats, 5-point racing harnesses, lowering springs, and a base model automatic Ford Focus SE. There were any number of dudes I knew fresh out of high school who would buy their second-hand, run-down cars and soup them up in garbage like this. It's a real first paycheck move for a certain kind of guy. While sitting in the shop waiting for my own car to have work completed, I witnessed a customer and their mechanic talking about the customer's car needing suspension repair. The customer had tried, unsuccessfully, to do the repair himself. The mechanic asked him why some lug nuts were missing and others were loose. The customer replied how he thought he would be helping the mechanic by loosening the tire for him. The customer had driven 20 minutes to get to the shop with a tire held on by a few loose lug nuts. Not a mechanic, but we do almost all of our farm equipment maintenance. Brother called during a hellacious snowstorm telling me, "Hurry, get over here and bring beer." I arrive with Bud Light in hand. He's got 2 lawn chairs under his carport. We get a beer and settled in our chairs out of the snow. We commenced watching his neighbors that were on crystal and higher than kites push this Mustang. They were trying to push start it. After about 10 minutes, we're hysterical. They'd been trying for almost 2 hours. It was an automatic transmission. You need to send an invite out to the rest of us next time. I'll bring the snacks. You can push start an automatic. It just has to be going faster than a manual. Dudes spending thousands of dollars modifying their pickups for off-roading, even though they spend 99.99% of the time on highways, and the furthest off of a road that they ever get is a logging road that a stock Forester could tackle with no problems. And then they complain about extra crappy fuel mileage and having to pay for new 35-inch knobby tires that only last about 10k miles because they wear super quickly if you mostly drive on pavement, and having to replace their front wheel bearings every other year because those larger wheels and tires are a lot heavier than the stock ones, and being super surprised to learn that parts for a 3/4-ton pickup can cost multiple times more than the comparable ones for a small sedan that they sold to afford their bro truck. I used to live in a small southeastern city and see a lot of suspiciously clean and undented bro-dozers driving around. What I wonder about these guys is, doesn't the tire noise drive you fricking insane? It's probably not something they even think about before getting the pickup jacked up to fit those 35-inch big blocks, but I would regret it so hard. I'm a rancher in Kansas, and before that I worked in the oil field going to rigs on soft dirt roads in the middle of nowhere. My trusty 04 Dodge Ram 4-wheel drive with everything stock and slightly more aggressive tires has been all I've ever needed to get through mud. If I couldn't get through it, you needed a tractor to get through. I fight the mud multiple times a year, and I still won't waste a cent on those lifted-up D-bag canoes that are driven by micro-PP wannabes. Service advisor here. Customer brings in a car last week Wednesday with a shaking issue. Cool. Take care of some of the issues the car actually has. Leave 10 times better. Issues include bad axles, TSB on diff, dirty transmission fluid, brown rear shocks, needing oil service. Done and gone. We listed the recommendations still required, but customer declined, only did axle and diff fluid service. Today, the same customer over the phone, "What in the fricking heck did you do to my car?" What's the issue? The issue is back and it's fricking 1,000 times worse. Why did I pay you? Okay, well if it's our repair that caused the problem, we're more than willing to see what's going on. We didn't replicate anything after test drive, so unfortunately we can't determine if it's the same issue without checking it out. I demand a tow truck be sent out and you guys have to flip the bill on this. I'm not paying for this nonsense. Sir, not a problem. If it is work we've done, we're happy to pay for the tow and correct the issues. But be advised, if the issue is due to other recommendations or a new issue, you'll be responsible for the tow fee. Yeah, that's fine. I know it's what you guys did anyway. Me. Okie dokes. Tow truck will be there within the hour. The tow truck picks car up, notices the issue, tells customer, notes it on the receipt, the customer signs and acknowledges it. We'll come back to this in a second. He gets the car, Punctures on the rear right outer tire sidewall, nice welt and gash the size of a penny, tire completely deflated, tow driver noted this, told customer and wrote it out and had customer sign it, grabbed the air hose, hook up to tire and just wheezing air out. Me. Well then. Yes sir, you had a flat tire where you were driving on it. Nope, not possible. It left here fine, and I barely drove it home and it sat since I picked up from you guys. According to the receipt, you acknowledged the puncture with the tow truck driver and signed it off knowing it was flat. But we did install a spare, drove about 10 miles on the street and freeway, and we cannot replicate the issue at this time. I can hear the customer trying to find the receipt, and he hangs up. Guess who just paid $75 on a tow bill? Ah, I see one of our male Karens made it into this story group. It's always nice to have a paper trail leading the blame back to the complaining customer. If only all of life was so satisfying. Mechanic here, lots of stories. One guy has OCD and got a license plate called Too Clean. Only let one guy in our shop touch his base model Dodge Dakota 2007. Had to double up on gloves and he would watch. Undersprayed his car with chrome spray. I work primarily on equipment. Operator calls out to his machine saying he had a crack on his boom. Think the first arm on a large excavator. I get out there and the whole boom has broken off and is on the ground. My favorite, though, had to be the operator who blew a hydraulic hose in a forestry setting, maybe $200 to change the hose. Decides he wants to walk the machine out to make the hose easier and runs the machine out of oil, blowing up the hydraulic pumps, $26,000, 2 travel motors, $8,000 each, and the auxiliary pump, $2,500. The machine was down for 2 months for him deciding to walk an extra 50 meters out of the bush so he didn't have to walk the extra distance. I have tons of stories about lazy operators, but this is probably the laziest. Guy was convinced his tires were different sizes because they were rotating at different rates. Like he jacked up each wheel and put the valve stem at the top, went for a drive and they were not lined up anymore. I had to explain it with chalk and string in the parking lot. Bad snow day, for whatever the frick reason, we were open. Guy pulls up needing a flat repair. He pulled up in a way the car could just be pulled in. Coworker goes to pull it in and can't stop, slams into his box. Wasn't going fast enough to damage anything. The car had 0 brakes. I say something to the customer. Oh, the foot brake? That hasn't worked in years. You have to use the hand brake. We inspect the vehicle and discover it doesn't even have brake calipers in the front, with the hoses clamped off and not an ounce of brake fluid in the master cylinder. And the most surprising part? They didn't want to have the brake repairs done. A customer brought their vehicle to the dealership I used to work for an airbag recall. They had bedazzled everything on the interior dash, including the covers for the airbags on the steering wheel and on the passenger side. I'm not sure she understands the fact that airbags have enough power to turn anything into shrapnel. I worked at a Chevy dealer and now work at a Jaguar and Land Rover dealer. I'm not surprised at people's stupidity anymore. More than once I've seen people add oil to the coolant reservoir. I've seen the inside of a motor where the customer never changed the oil since it was new, and the car had 50-something thousand miles on it. The dumbest thing I see every day is people come in with broke suspension parts, bald tires, and no brakes. They don't buy any of it and just want the oil change and insist we're trying to rip them off. But the same person will come in raising heck over a small safety recall and refuse to leave until it's done because the car's unsafe. Lady had a brand new at the time Subaru and was complaining about horrible gas mileage. People complain about gas mileage all the time and it's usually because of driving habits. I get the car in and it looks like she's hit something in the road and ripped a big hole in the gas tank, and all the fuel she put in poured right out onto the pavement. It was in fact a valid poor fuel economy complaint after all. Store workers and customers, what's your people of Walmart story? I worked at a Walmart for about 2 months. The weirdest thing I saw was an obese lady on a scooter run over a fat kid in the candy aisle and then threaten him because he almost tipped her. Security was called and she demanded to receive her items for free. Eventually, we just let her take the stuff because it was only like $5 worth of Skittles. What she really needed was tip assist. And some really good old-fashioned sketty wrestling. This is why some crap people continue to be crap people. You motherfrickers gave them free Skittles when they caused a gosh darn scene. Just like my spineless corporate slave of a manager when I worked retail. I worked at Walmart last year as a cashier, and a woman came up to my register with nothing but a pineapple, and a damaged one at that. It was 10 p.m. on a Tuesday, so it was a slow night, and she demanded I give her this pineapple for 25 cents because it was damaged. I didn't see any damage, so I asked her to show me the damage. She promptly ripped the top greens off the pineapple and said, "See it now?" I called my manager over and he said he can't sell it to her for a discount and he's sorry but she can get another one. She cursed, threw the pineapple at me, and walked out mumbling about needing a cigarette. She was a prime example of trailer trash, but damn she threw that pineapple hard. Fun fact, if you can pluck out the greens easily, it's a ripe pineapple. Usually the best metric I find is to smell it and see if it actually smells like pineapple. A lot of yellow is also a good indicator. You're correct, the most yellow while not having mold on the bottom is the best metric. Properly ripened pineapples are completely yellow, but they're never picked that way commercially and do not ripen off the plant, because they don't ship well when ripened. Here I am talking about a nightmare from my old job and suddenly I know how to pick out the perfect pineapple. So last year I worked at a Walmart supercenter as a cart pusher. You tend to see a lot of strange stuff in the parking lot, so all the weird crap doesn't even get your attention after a while. Part of the cart pusher's job is to bring back the store scooters after people leave them in the parking lot. One day I see an old woman outside the store just sitting on a scooter. This lady must have sat there for a good 2 hours before finally getting up to reveal a gigantic brown stain all over the lower back of her hoodie running up and down her pants. This obese lady who saw the whole thing comes sprinting up to the scooter and sits down on it before I could even clean it. She looked at me and said, "I don't care, hun. It was the last one left and my legs is killing me." When someone is so large that they'd rather sit in a person's waist than walk, you know that they have a serious freaking problem. I feel like there's going to be an awful lot of humanity in this group of stories. Maybe I should attempt to resist the urge to make judgmental comments for once. My privileged and ailment-free butt doesn't get to cast stones at people who have trouble walking and controlling their bowels. This was back in the late 90s. I was working at Walmart as my first job as a teenager. I was floated to the garden department one day and there was a guy looking at lawn fertilizer. I walked over and asked if he needs help. He said, "Not now, just looking at the different kinds you have." Pretty standard reply from the guy, so I said, "Okay, let me know." I walked away and then swang back in about 5 minutes. The same guy has proceeded to rip open about 10 different kinds of fertilizer all over the ground and is rolling around in the stuff. He's also taste sampling the stuff. I call my manager because I don't want to deal with it. Security escorted the guy out of the store and called an ambulance in case the ingestion of the fertilizer hurt him. I was expecting the story to end with, "And the guy tried to buy all we had and then the feds showed up." Instead, crap osmosis. Saw an old man take a dump on the floor of the bread aisle once. I worked at Whole Foods and on shift a person in dairy dropped a load right in the middle of the aisle. They must have been extremely lactose intolerant. "What is that? Milk? Oh no!" Mother's Day 2013. I was CSMing and handling the day as best as could be expected on a Sunday holiday where the employees were mostly female mothers. We had 13 call-outs and 5 no-call, no-shows. I had 5 poor women to handle the whole Sunday. Lines were long, I knew it. I didn't have anyone in the store coming in to help, management couldn't spare anyone. They understaffed on purpose. So I hear a call over the radio that someone has busted an aerosol can and they needed one of the maintenance associates on shift to deal with it. Apparently some jerk teenagers thought it would be funny to pop about 5 air freshener spray cans and let them spin and spit eye-stinging chemicals. I'm getting yelled at by a blue-haired old woman about the lines when I get the call that made me regret waking up that day and coming to work. "Sharon, you see that kid in the orange shoes to your left? Stop him." "Okay, why?" "He messed himself and is tracking feces all over. I'm trying to find his mother on the cameras right now." "Oh great, now I have a feces-covered 5-year-old to look after on top of everything. Did you find the mum yet?" "Yep, she was in the parking lot doing smack. Cops came, I had to mop up the feces, mum went to jail for possession with intent, neglect, and other felonious activities. The kid got cleaned up, I bought him new underwear and pants and socks, and I hosed off his shoes. He went with a social worker. I wanted to quit after that day. Someday that kid will post on future Reddit about an awful time he had as a child, and the only highlight is the kind Walmart employees that got him clean underwear, pants, and socks. He won't remember who it was, but he'll wish that he could thank you for your kindness." Thank you for your kind words. I only did what any compassionate human being would have done. It's amazing how many people bring their non-service animals into the store. I don't have a problem with dogs and such, but when I see the small dog you're carrying scratch and dander falls into the vegetables you're looking over, we've got a problem. Once a woman brought a bird into a fast casual dining establishment at which I was employed at that time. I told her she could order and pay, but she needed to wait outside because animals weren't allowed. She pointed to a service dog and demands to know why that dog can be in the store and not her bird. I informed her that this dog was a registered service and support animal that had been certified in its role and is probably vital to its owner's daily life. She starts screaming, and I mean screaming, "He's a healing bird! I love him! He helps me!" Now birds, you may know, don't really appreciate loud noises accompanied by sudden movements of the arms. She's also flailing her arms, and it takes off flying around the store. Chaos ensues. People are mad, and I no longer have to try to handle this lady because her friend has caught the bird and is literally dragging her out. The dog was fine though. My town has a bird guy, an older gentleman whose budgie rides around on the bill of his hat. He takes the thing everywhere. Nobody seems to mind because it always appears to be totally under control. I once saw him in Walmart with a little perch in the shopping cart for his bird to ride on. Not a worker, but standing in line one night, a lady seemed to be having a hard time being a parent to her 3-year-old daughter. At one point, the kid asks if she can have a candy bar that was next to the register. The exchange went like this. "Mommy, can I have a Snickers?" "I don't give a damn." Kid tries to reach up for candy. "I can't reach it. Can you help me?" "You want me to help you get the candy? You need to get a fricking job." Sounds about as classy as my cousin. She was potty training her 4-year-old and the little girl says, "Mommy, I have to poop." Only for my crap heap of a cousin to yell, "I put you in a fricking diaper. Use it." Well, I thought this would mostly be a mildly amusing series of cutaways, like from the excellent TV show Superstore. Little did I know how sad it would get. I worked at Walmart in the toy department 10 years ago, right out of high school for extra money. The amount of parents who would drop their children off in the toy department like I was a babysitter was out of this world. By the time they'd left it, it would be a disaster area. On more than one occasion, I'd see them running down the aisle with their arms outstretched, just knocking crap on the floor. When the parents would come back, there was no, "Hey, let's pick all this up." They'd just leave. I only lasted a few months. I actually quit a week before Black Friday because we had an instance at our morning meeting where some of the veteran employees were telling us what to expect on Black Friday from customers. Examples include being spat on, pulled by the arms, knocked over, shoved, tripped, screamed at, hair pulled, threatened, etc. I went on break and didn't come back. Not worth minimum wage. That sucks. I can sympathize. I lifeguarded at a public school for several years in high school, and people did this all the time. More often than not, the kids under the age of 10. I yanked them out of the deep end, and they didn't have any parents or guardians with them. Unbelievably frustrating in both scenarios. You're the person who brought this child into the world, which means you're responsible for him or her. The worst part is that these people are the ones to raise lawsuits if their kid gets hurt while under your watch. I spent many of my summers at the local pool, but in my case, I was old enough to bring myself there, and it wasn't my parents just dropping me off, and older than their posted 13 and under must be with an adult sign. That pool actually did pull unattended children out when they noticed them, and get the police involved in returning them to their parents. Since nobody involved ended up amused by this, it didn't usually happen repeatedly. The one that sticks out in my mind is this couple of really overweight folks. That in itself is not such an issue, but it's the smell I remember. It hit me before I saw them, the very distinct smell of festering, unwashed body. And naturally, they came straight to me to ask for things. Ugh, I have a few of those where I work, and the two of them have no sense of personal space. I've taken to holding a large item in front of me as a spacer whenever I see them come in. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Oh, I have so many people. But actually, why don't I introduce you to another worker? Meet Gary. Gary is 81 years old. He also fought in the Vietnam War. Gary is a short little cute old man. However, Gary is also fricking crazy. Let's go through everything Gary told me before I left for school. The Kennedys committed the atrocities of September 11th. Yep, the entire gang was in on it. JFK, RFK, Ted, Ed, and John. Why else do you think JFK and RFK were assassinated? Agent Orange is for wimps. Obama gave 2 statements after Charleston, one to the country and another to his cabinet that said they were going to take all the guns. That school shooting was fake, because Joe Biden actually adopted all the fake victims so he would never see them again. He owned a bunch of real estate in California and owned adult video stores. He actively went to adult flick conventions and said that he was in the committee to determine if someone could be a adult flick superstar, so that meant he got to do the deed with a bunch of girls. Blacks by law can't be police officers. If you want to woo, yes, he said it like Ric Flair, a female, you just gotta ask me for some tips. Alright, thanks Gary, I have a girlfriend though. My girlfriend's got a tight hoo-ha. Okay, Gary wasn't just delusional, Gary also didn't have a filter. Woman with a large chest walks past him. Did you see the bosom on her? And she heard him. John, if you don't go on break, I'm going to tie your braces to the back of my car and tear them off. I did the deed with my girlfriend last night. Oh, okay. I was pounding it from behind. Gary, aren't you like 80? Oh, don't worry, I took a pill before I did it. Gary wasn't just delusional and obnoxious, he was defiant. From day one to my last day, he had a theory that the boss was out to get him, and that the boss always got upset over petty things. He used to say, "Frick that wang sucker Dave." But our boss didn't get upset over petty things, and his name was actually Bill. I miss Gary's crazy butt. Gary sounds awesome in small doses. When I worked in another department, I loved Gary because he was like that old man who sits on a porch. He would wave every time you passed because he was insistent that there needed to be someone at the cash register 24/7. There didn't need to be. When we started working together in the same department, we became enemies. I was being groomed to take over the department when the department manager was going to retire later that year. I'd started in April and they made the announcement in June. Gary had been there since 2011. I was 18 and he was 81. He didn't like it in the slightest. So we started butting heads constantly and he would threaten me with ridiculous things like tying my braces to his car. So then I responded right back. I got a wireless speaker, put it in the cash register place and played high-pitched noises until he yelled, "What the frick is going on?" And he would make ridiculous claims like that I'd set up a wire trap with a shotgun so when I came in today I would get shot, but luckily I saw the wire. I own a business in front of a supercenter. This morning I came in and noticed my dumpster was stuffed full with Walmart's garbage. I reviewed my HD camera and saw their contracted parking lot sweepers throwing over 20 bags of garbage away at 5:15 in the morning. I got in that gosh darn dumpster, pulled all those bags out and filled 6 Walmart carts up. I rolled them right on in front of the store and then I went back to my office, called the manager and told him that the next time I would call the cops for illegal dumping. Being in front of a Walmart sucks sometimes. There's a huge dumped cat colony and the place is a bum magnet. Thanks for reading, I just had to get that off my chest. Ah, that sucks. I think I would have called the manager first and had them send someone to get their garbage out of your dumpster. No point in you getting filthy because of their stuff up. Oh, I imagine there was a fair bit of catharsis in cleaning that stuff out and airing out all of their literal garbage in front of the store. Maybe not the most adult reaction, but I get it. So a couple of years ago, I was in between jobs, I needed loot to pay the bills, so I figured that I'd take a job at Walmart until something better came along. I ended up working in the lawn and garden section, which is actually fun when you get to play with the plants all day long. However, I wasn't aware that lawn and garden also does all of the holiday setup and placing said product on the floor. Fast forward a week before the public school systems were in session, I had a cart full of notebook paper, pencils, trapper keepers, etc. that I was trying to put on the shelves when a sound ripped through my eardrums that was similar to the ones that are typically only heard on the Discovery Channel. Several decibels too loud, the best I can describe it is cats being lit on fire by their tails and being chased by rabid wolves. I looked around to figure out who in the crap was being murdered in the store when I saw him. It was a kid about 8 years old who looked as if he was desperately trying to become Jabba the Hutt, and said kid was succeeding. Now, I have no problem with fat kids. I typically even think that they're pretty freaking cute. However, this kid was not, due mainly to the alligator tears that were rolling down his cheeks, the beach red color on his face, and the sounds coming out from his throat hole. It took me a minute to figure out what in the heck was going on in my aisle until I realized that this kid was throwing a fit because his parents wouldn't buy him 3 different trapper keepers. One of which was Hello Kitty. Normally I'd just shrug and say, typical Saturday in Walmart, but oh no. This little B-word realized that his dad wasn't paying attention to him and was instead focused on the others kids that I'm only assuming share some form of genetic makeup with this whiny beast of burden. This tees off the kid even more since he howls with rage and, here's where it gets insane, kicks his what looked like 8-month pregnant mother in the stomach. To her credit, this lady didn't whomp the spoiled little monster's butt right in the aisle. No, she instead collapsed on the darn floor and had to be taken away by paramedics, and that little B-word took that as a sign that he could have all the trapper keepers he wanted. I watched this whole thing go down, and as the dad watched his wife get loaded into the ambulance, not one iota of, "you're gonna get it later," came from him. Instead, the crap stain that kicked his mum started crying about being hungry and wanting chicken nuggets, which the dad then took him to get. This is why I hate people. I stopped shopping at Walmart when I went to college. The local Walmart was notoriously bad. 3 times in a row I went there and walked down an aisle just in time to see a kid peeing themselves in the aisle and no parent was in sight. The city made big news when the Walmart men's restroom was found to have a makeshift crystal lab in one of the stalls. Our area was predicted for a moderate snowstorm, but the weather forecasts gave it ridiculous numbers, like they claimed we'd have 6 inches of ice and 2 feet of snow in one night. Us rational people knew, and were right, that we'd probably get 4 inches of snow. But many people swarmed the Walmart, and a few people made a Facebook page showing how devastated the store was in preparation for Snowpocalypse 2011. The Facebook page showed pictures as the store was swept clean within a couple of hours of ramen, wine, milk, and cheese. My favorite picture that someone put up was the 40-year-old man who had a shopping cart with 37 gallons of milk in it. Nothing else, just a crap ton of milk. That man sounds like the guy from your elementary school math problems. Okay, so I was leaving Walmart with my purchases. As I walked down to my car in the parking lot, I saw a pair of adult sweatpants sitting in a sort of pile they do when someone steps out of them, with a massive, messy crap on top of them. I had so many questions. Where did the person go after detonating these pants? Into the store? Just bottomless into their car with crappy butt cheeks? Amazing. I don't work at Walmart, but when I was halfway across the country visiting some friends, the Walmart in their town had a crystal lab bust in the men's restroom. Oh, good old Muncie, Indiana. I used to attend college in that town. I just graduated high school and took a job at Wally World since they always paid above minimum wage up here. On the most part, Canadian Walmart is completely different from the what the frick mecca that is the American one. I guess the main thing that stuck was during the summer. I was working as a truck unloader in the back and had to bring out a skid of diapers and such to the infant section. As I approached, I noticed a smell. At first I thought it was that gosh darn bird that always flew around. I figure I hadn't seen it in days, so maybe it had died somewhere around there and was stinking up the place. I dropped the skid off and went past the women's changing rooms. That's where all the girls who worked in clothing hung out. I was hoping to say hi to everyone, but I noticed that they delta split from that location. Reason they moved? It was the epicenter of the smell. To this day, I have never smelled anything quite like it. I've worked in a microbiology lab growing mold and fungi. I've worked in hospitals and smelled all sorts of nasty. I put in some time in pathology labs. Needless to say, I've smelled a whole bunch of horrible things in my life, but nothing compares to that Walmart scent. What was it, you ask? Well, it turns out that an elderly lady had gone into the changing room and taken a giant Coke can-width grey-coloured crap with flecks of black in it, and a bit of blood coating some of it, all over the floor. The whole thing must have weighed 2 pounds easy. She wrote a little letter and left it in the room with the clothes she was trying on. All the letter said was, "I am so sorry." Needless to say, I think Granny had something horribly wrong with her, because crap doesn't smell like that. To this day, I assumed the black in the crap was dried blood from some internal issue, and I figured she tore her butthole pushing that monster out. The smell though, ugh, it's like if you huff an abscess while smearing yourself with durian fruit while taking a dump. It was easily the worst smelling thing I've ever experienced. In conclusion, some grandma took a horribly thick crap on the floor which had blood in it. I feel like at least once a week I have to do one story that makes me gag, and ladies and gentlemen, that was it. Congratulations everyone, I'll see you on the next one. Just last week I was unloading a truck in the back and this morbidly obese woman hobbles up through the big associates-only doors, bends over and drops a load on the floor, pulls her pants back up and walks out. I got written up for yelling, "What the actual frick?" but after the managers looked at the camera, they thought it was justified for me to yell that and let me off with a warning. I don't know what happened to her, but the maintenance guys were teed off. I feel like Walmart is one of the few things where all of the stereotypes and stories you hear are actually super accurate. My experience though, a very overweight woman with a walker strapped to the back of her electric wheelchair was drinking half and half straight from a carton while she threw loose pairs of sandals all over the floor. I have a friend who hasn't been to a Walmart in 15 years. He flat out refuses to go in for any reason. He's a pretty down-to-earth guy, not the type who thinks he's better than anyone else, but he avoids Walmart specifically because of the people who shop there. His reasons usually center around crying babies, overweight aisle cloggers, and the few weird old men who sit by the entrance or exit gawking at the college girls. One day, my friend and I were looking for a certain product before leaving town on a trip. We had just been to a few stores around town and I kept telling him, I know that this is in Walmart, we should just go there. Finally, he agrees to go visiting Big Box Land, but he will go into the Home Depot next door to look for a product while I go into Walmart. As soon as I step inside the door, I see a massive woman on a motorized shopping cart with her massive 12-year-old son standing on the back of it. She's screaming at him, saying, "Now you get off of there, boy," or something like that. His retort, "Frick you, mama, you ain't even handicapped." I got the product we need that day, but now I do my best to avoid Walmart as well. I saw this lady start screaming about a golden lab service dog being too close to her child. The child was sitting in a cart in the checkout line and the dog was calmly sitting on the floor behind her. The dog doesn't even bark, lick, or move. Nothing. And the woman gets ghetto and starts shouting at everyone in sight. She had to be escorted from the store and never got to buy her stuff. At least Walmart protected the real victim in this situation. People who don't believe that this stuff actually happens must have never worked in retail. I can assure you that this is an everyday occurrence around Atlanta. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.